and welcome to the Tuesday, December 14th, 2021 continuation of the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. We're going to jump right into it. We have a packed agenda. Item 10 on our agenda is County Council. I see Mr. Dingle is with us. Any announcements, sir?
Yes, I just wanted to announce that I've been mentioned it the last couple of weeks that our newest Assistant County Counsel, Marcus Vijar, started today, or actually yesterday, sorry, 12/13. He worked as a clerk for us for a couple of years, did an outstanding job, so we're really excited to have him on board. He's going to focus on the civil commitments and providing civil commitments and doing other legal work for HHS and DHS. That's generally his focus area. So, and Diana, is Becky on? Does she have control of the slideshow?
Not only is Becky on, but yes, she's already showing her screen.
Yes. So therefore, we are ready to go on item 10B, report, fatal crash investigation report. Please, Mr. Ding.
All right. Chair Verdi, thank you, members of the board. The Fatal Crash Investigation Team, as you know, reports to you quarterly on the county's commitment towards zero deaths. You know, it was formed in 2017 as part of the Transportation Safety Action Plan. We have people from all across the county. We have people from Public Works. We have me and County Council. That's to preserve attorney-client privilege. We also have people from HHS and Public Health, and as well, and from time to time, other individuals from, for example, the district attorney's office, and also we have as a regular member the sheriff's office. Next slide, Becky. Oop, can Becky hear me? There you go. Mine's not switching. There we go. So these are the we had been making some progress, but these are the last numbers and what you with regard to statewide roadway fatalities. We noted the downward trend in 2020 needed a closer look. We learned that the lower number was actually related to the significant reduction in traffic volumes with fewer people driving due to COVID-related restrictions. Further, we learned that when comparing crashes with traffic volumes, the crash rate was actually greater in 2020, and that there was a growing evidence about people driving more recklessly with more speeding and intoxicated driving than ever before. The preliminary data for 2021 through November shows these theories to be true. As you can see on this chart, fatalities in Lane County has spiked back up this year, surpassing prior years. This chart also shows how Lane County is still in the top 4 counties with the most fatalities. And again, we did have a presentation by someone who did discuss that very theory that essentially people are much more careless because they have not been driving regularly, and when they get out on the road, they feel the need to drive faster than they did before. Next one, slide 3. You know that we also applied for and got a grant for the safety corridor program, and that's what we've done is tried to bring the 4 E's that are the benchmark or the foundation of this program to one of our high-risk areas, the London Road area, which has had more fatal and serious injury crashes than most roads in Oregon. Thanks to the board's support, we're managing a 2-year pilot project, making use of that special safety corridor pilot program. And just as a note, this is only the second one in the state. The first one was in Marion County. The second one was here on London Road. Next slide. And as part of that, we talked about it at our last board meeting. We're heavily focused on engaging the community because most of the crashes are the result of poor driver decisions, such as speeding and intoxication. We've been promoting safety messages and expanding awareness about the corridor designation, resulting in traffic fines doubling. And you can see this, and we're going to see some of the more details of the program in this next slide that we've engaged in. Next slide. So this is what we've been doing to promote our message in the and awareness in the community. We have contacted the media. We had some folks appear on the radio on the Cottage Grove Beeper show and talk about it. We passed out, and we'll get to this, I think, in the next one. We've done some, as a result of a survey, we put out some signs. I believe Commissioner Bozovich mentioned that he'd seen some of the signs during the last thing. So we've been trying to get the word out We've also presented to the Cottage Grove Rotary and promote the safety message wherever we have the opportunity. Next slide, Becky. So we asked, and again, we know that that community engagement is critical. If this is going to work, we're not going to get the results that we want simply with enforcement because of the limited resources. We need the assistance of the community. The community obviously was engaged and excited about the idea of this designation because they do believe it's going to save lives. So what we did is we designed a DIY campaign around survey findings that were actually derived directly from the community. As we told you last time, 99% of the survey respondents said they'd be willing to be a designated driver. So we're focusing that message around there and getting people to participate in that. You'll recall from earlier things, we've done a lot of work around this. They're just, these rural areas, one of the challenges is the lack of cabs, lack of Uber drivers and things like that, other alternatives to driving themselves. So really the one that is available to us is the designated driver, the person who agrees to be there and do it. Next slide, Becky. So this is the campaign. This is the slogan that we applied, and you can see we started this around Halloween. We're going to do it again during the holiday season. The sheriff's office, we've got the sign. It's the, if you feel different, you drive different. Again, a lot of the material that we've discussed and researched are people who use marijuana who believe that they're actually better drivers when they use marijuana because they believe they're more cautious. That's obviously totally contrary to all of the scientific data. Next one. And so here's some common things that, again, this would be of value, especially to the rural commissioners, but everyone. These are the kind of questions that we pick up and get in our survey. Why aren't there cameras? Why aren't there automated speeding things? And why aren't there sobriety checkpoints? First of all, the traffic cameras and the automated speed enforcement does require legislative change. We talked about that a number of years ago. The legislature has to designate and authorize those. There are also manpower issues, which we'll get to here in a minute, hopefully, when we talk about that in more detail. And unlike other states, the Oregon, not the United States Constitution, but the Oregon Constitution prohibits sobriety checkpoints, because what you end up doing is stopping everyone irrespective of reasonable suspicion. And the Oregon Supreme Court has said you cannot do that. Next one, Becky. So this one is, we've been measuring actual speeds with tube counters. The before speeds are in blue, before the safety corridor signs were installed. The after speeds are in green, after the safety corridor signs were installed. The 50th is basically what 50% of what people are driving. The 85th percent is what most people are driving. This is the number that the most speed setting methodology is based upon. You can see here that there wasn't much of a change between the two before and after the measurements. But the overall number of people speeding has dropped significantly, which is the last column on the chart. So again, we're making progress, but it is slow. Next slide, Becky. So that's everything. I did want to touch on one thing. We've had a lot of discussions, and I know that you probably get these questions from constituents, and picking up on the piece about the automated safety or automated speed cameras and automated enforcement. Not only does it require legislative change, but it's also an issue of manpower for the sheriff's office. People think that those tickets are issued sort of automated, if you will. They actually have to be reviewed. And so one of the changes that was proposed in the legislature was to make that more economically viable, was maybe not to have full-time or fully sworn DPSST certified individuals doing that, and or allowing for retired deputy sheriffs to do it, so that they don't have to take, again, if you have to have a deputy sheriff sit there and look through all of these videos and look through all these cameras and write up all these citations, they're obviously not on the road actually doing enforcement work. They're sitting in an office looking at a computer. So we're trying to find ways for the sheriff to get that same work accomplished, assuming that we could get the legislature to authorize it without actually reducing the deputy sheriffs that are out on the road. So that's all I have, unless you have some specific questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dingle. Commissioners, any questions or comments? I see none. That must have been a slam dunk report.
Okay. I will see you this afternoon in executive session.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we are now on item 11, emergency management. 11A, order 21-12-14-06, in the matter of adopting the 2021 update to Lane County's emergency operations plan. And I believe we have Mr. Elijah Davis here to review this with us.
Yes, I am here. Sorry about how raspy my voice is. Are you able to see my screen?
We see your screen and we hear your voice, and it's not that raspy.
Perfect. All right. So, Chair Bernie, members of the board, thank you very much. Again, my name is Elijah Davis. I'm the senior analyst for Lane County Emergency Management. And what I have the opportunity to do today is to go through some of the updates on our Lane County Emergency Operations Plan, what the updates were and why we did them. All right, so in many cases in history, the county emergency management has gone years without activating an emergency operations plan, or let alone an emergency operations center. Over the last 2 years since the last formal promulgation of this plan, which was December of 2019, we've had quite a few incidents. You can see right there, I came on with the county in February of 2020. Within a week, I was at the PSB and at Charlton with patients setting up the Emergency Operations Center for COVID. Later that summer, we had the Sweet Creek Fire that was near Mapleton. About a week later, we had the Labor Day Fire, Holiday Farm Fire. We're still recovering from that. We were in a drought declaration earlier this year. And then we have the Middle Fork Fire, which is nearby Oak Ridge. And heat dome event, which it should say heat dome events, June, July, and August, we had 3 different times we activated. And then more recently, we had the Mapleton water interruption. And what I wanted to do is kind of go into some of these were more of a virtual activation. Some of them just took certain levels of either emergency management, stakeholders, things like that. And all of these, we look back on them and say, okay, what lessons did we learn from this? How do we inform our way forward? And what we do is we don't just think about it and say, yeah, we'll do that better next time. We really do put it into our actionable plans. So that is the basic plan. The basic plan stands on the stilts of a couple other plans, and we'll go into that in a second. But I wanted to talk to you about a couple of the things that we really narrowed in on. One was the use of mutual aid and ORCA agreements. And ORCA is an Oregon Resource Coordination Assistance Agreement. It's a intergovernmental agreement in which we, either in advance or in real time, we say, hey, City of Eugene, hey, Douglas County, we would like to have this of your resources, or we would like to borrow this. And it's all written down, and how we do it, how we pay for it, things like that. And so these, we actually did this quite a bit throughout COVID, but we also did it in Holiday Farm Fire quite a bit. Another piece that we looked into is whenever we go to the state for any kind of resource request, the first thing they always ask from the state is, have you exhausted all local efforts? Meaning, have you talked to City of Eugene? Have you talked to City of Springfield? Have you talked to Florence? Have you talked to your neighbors, neighboring counties, to get that same resource? So getting that whole community, knowing what you have at your assets, your resources, things like that, better informed how we updated our emergency operations plan for this go around. One of the pieces to the newly updated or proposed updated 2021 update EOP is on page 73, which I believe is one of the last annexes, and that is a conflagration integration. It actually specifies, it's about a page and a half, that I worked with Chief Chad Minter from Coburg Fire, who's also the chair of the Fire Defense Board locally. And it really is the relationship of how to activate a conflagration, how the Fire Defense Board works with you, how we work with the three of you. So that's that was kind of rewritten and updated to better align with standard practices and delegation of authority. Next arrow there, alignment with multi-jurisdictional EOPs. Eugene Springfield have a multi-jurisdictional emergency operations plan that they recently just updated. But we also take from Cottage Grove, Lowell, Veneta, Crestwell, Junction City, a few others. They all have emergency operations plan. So we like to integrate those into our plan so that there's seamless transition. We're speaking the same language, things like that. So that was part of the updates. And then, excuse me, in the last arrow there, development of incorporated or incident management teams, red, white, and blue. This was in-house county staff that would fill emergency operations center staff roles, everything from incident commander to section chief to a emergency support function position. And what we did was, this was an idea from patients that she had probably before, but she put it down on paper in 2019 and said, hey, I'd like to try this out in the future. Well, the future came really fast when it came to COVID, and we instituted this red, white, and blue team, which is a triple redundancy in staff, in positions. We got a lot of people over this last 2 years experience and access into emergency operations centers that have never seen one before. So we also updated that as well. Whenever we talk about the county, not just emergency management, but the county activating, we consider how big the event is, who's involved, what is the impact to life, and it's not just human life. Life safety is a priority number one. However, we're looking at property, we're looking at preservation, we're looking at infrastructure, waterways, things like that. Another piece that will be completely reversed from the last update, which was 2019, is our leveled response. We actually aligned with both the national, state, and local emergency operations plans, in which it's actually a reverse activation. So we used to say 1 was routine, basic, nothing's really happening, and 4 was catastrophic. From a federal guidance level, we actually have it in reverse order. So the only thing I can think of to kind of match that up to people's understanding is the Department of Defense has the Defcon levels, and it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 1 is the most catastrophic. It's the worst case scenario. So for us, we do a 4 level. 4 is routine, 1 is catastrophic. And what it does is I'll switch to the next slide here. You start at the top left, white, in a routine or minor, and that's probably like patients and I, or maybe a couple other people to monitor and listen and find out if somebody just needs to be coordinated, matching 2 entities together, that kind of thing. It would increase both to the right and down in how big of an event that is. So if you look all the way down to the bottom right, where it's full and level 1 catastrophic, that's your holiday farm fires. That's your COVID. As I said, your base plan, which is a public-facing document, it doesn't show all of our back numbers, who exactly we call, every little bit of operations that we have. We keep those internally. Those are not public-facing. So what we do is we inform those and make sure that the base plan covers what we have updated in these 3 different pieces to the plan. So you have your emergency support functions, you have your operational annexes, and you have your support annexes. Operational annexes are the outlines. It outlines the activations, protocols, and businesses and processes of our emergency operations center. The next one, support annexes, are all hazard documentation that supports EOC and field operations. And then the last one, emergency support functions. Those are the numbers 1 through 18 at which we we just updated as well to align with state and federal guidance. And it's everything from ESF 1 would be transportation, ESF 4 is firefighting, ESF 16 is volunteers and donations. So it calls out a specific subject matter in which we would want somebody as a representative to be a branch supervisor or director in our emergency operations center to kind of tell us our best way forward. So a good example would be a mass care, which is ESF 6. We might want a leader to tell us what our best efforts are on mass care so that we can build underneath them. So there was several other updates, mainly demographic information to make sure that the plan was as up to date as possible. There is one piece for natural hazard mitigation in there that the natural hazard mitigation plan has a longer cycle. So this round, we don't update it, but by the time 2023 comes around, we'll have new information for that. So this is just kind of my updates based on what we spent time on to make sure that the emergency operations plan for the county was as best and efficient to use. We don't want a document put together that just sits on the shelf and collects dust. We want to make sure that it's something that can be used as a framework for each situation that we face. So based on that, what we are asking for is the every 2-year cycle of accepting the updates with a formal promulgation and signature by the Board of Commissioners. And I guess I open it up for questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. That was really informative. Commissioners, questions, comments? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. The emergency management team just continues to impress me every single day with doing this work in the middle of a series of ongoing emergencies still. This is just so good to be able to document what we've already been through while we're going through it also. Thank you for this, and thank you to the whole emergency management team. I'm so glad you're with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? No? Okay, well, Mr. Davis, thank you very much. You know, the first, I think it was, oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Commissioner Bozovich.
I'd like to move to approve Order 2112-1406 in the matter of adopting the 2021 update to Lane County's emergency operations plan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bozovich has moved acceptance of, and Commissioner Buck has seconded Order 21-12-14-06 in the matter of adopting the 2021 update to Lane County's emergency operations plan. Are there any, is there discussion toward the motion? Now, Commissioner, if I may, I just, Mr. Davis, the first slide that you had, maybe it wasn't the first, you listed how right after you came on board, there were all these different emergencies. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was coming up here. I don't recall. You don't have to bring it up. I don't recall.
That's that second slide.
Very much. So it looks to me like of these 6 things that hit in your first 2 years, and Commissioner Buck's in my second 2 years, and Commissioner Trier's first year, the vast majority of them have some intersection with climate. Would you say that's correct or not?
Absolutely. You know, we have, 3 different pieces there that are fire related or heat related. As I said, the heat dome events are more heat dome events.
Right, those several of them, right.
And then the other piece that was not on this slide that I added last minute was the Mapleton water interruption. Well, that may have been done, may have been a part of the the water system itself, but it was propagated by the flooding that was happening. And that in turn is a weather-related issue as well.
Thank you. I didn't know, and I couldn't remember. Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion before we call for the motion? Okay. Commissioner Bozovich has moved. Commissioner Buck has seconded. Approval of Order 21-12-14-06. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let the record show that Order 21-12-14-06, made by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner Buck, is approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Board.
We are now on item 11B, Order 21-12-14-07, in the matter of extending the declaration of a local emergency as a result of public health response to COVID-19. And we have our award-winning Patience Winningham, Emergency Manager, and Steve Adams with us. Please.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Thanks for having us this afternoon. I brought with me my friend here, Mr. Adams, and we are here to make a formal request to extend the declaration for COVID through March 31st. There are a number of reasons why we're here to ask for the extension of this declaration, and Mr. Adams, I'd be happy to turn it over to you for additional narrative.
Indeed. Chair Bernie and commissioners, good afternoon. Good to see you again. And as Patience indicated, we are bringing this declaration to your attention today and requesting an extension. So FEMA has, in fact, rolled forward 100% cost recovery for various activities associated with the ongoing COVID response now through March 31. We anticipate that Governor Brown will be extending her emergency declaration, which currently expires 12/31, out to be congruent with that. Indeed, that's vital for us to be able to access those resources as a matter of course. As I presented this morning, we have ongoing operations of significant scale before us, nearly 150,000 individuals who are fully vaccinated and who have yet to receive a boost. And whilst that will be an ongoing all-hands-on-deck operation between the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors within Wayne County nonetheless will continue to play a very significant role. So for that and other operating reasons, Chair Bernie and board, we are making the request for the extension of this declaration at this time.
Well, thank you both very much. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So I guess my first question is do we have to have our own local emergency declared to apply for these reimbursements from FEMA?
We do not have to have an emergency declaration in place in order to seek the reimbursements from FEMA. However, we are asking the board for an extension of the declaration for a few reasons. One of them is to enter into contractual agreements with some of our community partners to continue to maintain our capacity to distribute vaccinations with other resources, not necessarily just county staff, but the limited duration and temp staff, as well as continue testing capabilities here in Lane County for the next 3 to 4 months through March 31st.
So understanding that, we originally did this declaration partly to give the county administrator authority to act quickly and the emergency operations to act quickly. We're beyond need to act within a short period where we can't have things come to the board on, for regular passage. I'm just kind of we're at the point where this is endemic, not pandemic. And why we can't have things come to us on regular board schedule if it's over 100,000 or whatever, I'm failing to understand the need to extend the emergency. By the way, Commissioner Farr, your mic's live.
Thank you. I'll put the cat down.
I was wondering what that was. I'm sorry, Ms. Winningham, please.
Not knowing the back end of the current standing for our contractual obligations for COVID and vaccination and testing capabilities, I don't know what the potential time constraints could be for staff to get those deliverables to the board in a more appropriate time schedule. I don't know the answers to those, Commissioner Bozovich. I apologize.
I'm going to call on Commissioner Krieger, but it may be that Mr. Mokrahysky needs to come on to continue with that explanation. But please, Commissioner Krieger.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question is simply, what is the downside, if any, to extending the emergency declaration? Is there a cost associated? Is there any additional work? My understanding is extending something that where the work's already been done to craft it simply just does just that. It extends work that's already been done and gives us the maximum flexibility on the administrative side to access the resources we might need to do the best response to meet the needs of our community. So if there's some actual cost or downside to not extending the emergency, I'd like to know what it is. Otherwise, I'm fully in support of doing so.
Mr. Mokrahysky, were you going to provide some clarification?
I would agree with Commissioner Trigger's assessment. I think, unfortunately, throughout parts of this process in the last couple of years, there's been a misunderstanding and mischaracterization of what the emergency declaration actually is, because there've been different levels of government involved at the federal and state level, and some of those declarations have come with certain restrictions. This local county declaration really just does allow that. I'm not aware. Certainly, I'd ask Patience or Steve Adams to clarify, but I'm not aware of any downside to that. And we certainly are still in, as you heard from the update this morning, still very much in a significant state of disease in our community, and so it allows us to allocate the resources necessary, respond with agility and efficiency to the needs in the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would just add, we thought we were in a very different situation for a brief and beautiful window earlier this summer, and then we had the Delta variant. And here we are with the Omicron variant, although it seems, a little less intensively scary than the Delta, thankfully, because of our increased vaccination rate. But if these last 2 years have shown us nothing, it really is we don't know what's coming next, and that being as prepared and nimble as possible is the best approach to protect community.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners? No more? Okay, well, if that sums up the discussion, then the chair would entertain a motion. Yes,
I will move passage of order. Oops, it just went away. There we go. 21-12-14-07 in the matter of extending the declaration of a local emergency as a result of public health response to COVID-19.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Excuse me. Order 21-12-14-07 has been moved by Commissioner Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is there discussion to the motion? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
So I'm going to be voting against this extension. There is a downside to extending the emergency. One is we give up some of our fiscal control that is normal to the Board of Commissioners by authorizing the county administrator to spend beyond our normal limits of expenditures. Two is a psychological issue of continual constant state of emergency when we're reaching the level of pandemic. And I just don't think there's enough that can be said about that. And three is a perception issue, which is the perception that we're using an extended linked emergency to take extraordinary power, which I don't believe Wayne County has ever done, but there's a perception out there in the public. And seeing we don't need an emergency to get reimbursed from FEMA, we're not perceiving a need to have to deal with some kind of emergency action that has to happen between board meetings. There's no reason to continue this local emergency around COVID-19. We need to get back to, this is an endemic disease, contagious disease in our community that we're going to have to continually deal with, just like we do with sexually transmitted diseases, hepatitis, and many other diseases that we have to be concerned about that are contagious and endemic in our society.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you. I do share Commissioner Bozovich's interpretation and understanding and concern. I'm going to vote in favor of the motion. However, this is through March of the coming year, and in my estimation, it's prudent at this point in time to allow that latitude that we're granting with this with the emergency declaration or the continuation of. I'm going to look very hard at it in March if numbers continue to meet what we expect. But Commissioner Bozovich, thank you for bringing this up. You're not the only person that has that concern, nor am I. It's spread throughout the community that we are extending an emergency potentially for, in some people's views, not legitimate reasons. In my views, at this point in time, it is legitimate. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Anyone else? I would just like to state that if the county administrator says there is no downside, if we're not meeting for 3 weeks after this, if 2 of the 3 issues, which I share those concerns, but if we are not fueling either the psychological or the optics issue, but rather are trying to de-escalate those and put them in a perspective, understanding that this is just giving us the flexibility to respond if necessary. I also share the concerns, but we'll be supporting this motion. Are there any other comments before I call the motion? It has been, forgive me, I think I have this right. It has been order 21-12-14-07 in the matter of extending the declaration of a local emergency as a result of public health response to COVID-19 has been made by Commissioner Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is that correct? Thank you. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Let the record show that order 21-12-14-07 made by Commissioner Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Buck, has been approved 4 votes to 1, Commissioner Bozovich in the minority. Thank you very much. Thanks. We are now on item 13, County Administration, 12A, discussion in the matter of presenting the draft FY 22-23 to FY 26-27 Lane County Capital Improvement Plan. And we have Christine Moody, our Budget and Financial Planning Manager, who will walk us through this. Ms. Moody.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, Commissioners. Just to confirm, can you see my screen with a PowerPoint on it? Okay. I've been watching the struggles today, so I'm really hoping this goes smoothly. So just a very brief PowerPoint for you. So as mentioned, this is a draft of our capital improvement plan that will begin next fiscal year. So it's what we're working on as we build this next budget, and it will go for a 5-year term. So just some summary items for you, and then want to point out a few changes that we've made to the plan. And you should have the document as part of your packet. So overview, this is actually the 5th year of us preparing this countywide CIP plan and listing the goals there for us again, planning to maintain our assets, making sure that we provide the information to policymakers, you and others, as you make the decisions about our capital assets and what projects we do. and then enable for better planning and prioritization. So there are 3 types of forms that you will see in the document itself. We refer to standard projects as those that are, they've had their planning process completed and there's identified funding. Pre-planning is when we are aware of a project. We might be well into design and planning for it, but maybe haven't identified all of the funding, or the other way around. The funding could be identified and we're still working on planning and design. And then we've also had a section in the plan for community investments. And those are places where the county would be putting county funds towards an asset that we don't own. A most recent example that you'll see in this plan is the plan for a community health center in Cottage Grove. Project summary, there's categories within the plan. Facilities, fleet, parks, roads, technology, and waste management is the way that we have defined the different plans. The only one you will not see in this document is fleet does not have a project at this time. And we're talking about fleet system when we're talking about fleet, not the individual vehicles. So there are 117 projects in this plan with 48 standard and 69 pre-planning forms. And then, as I mentioned, I just want to highlight a couple things that we've changed in this document. We're always looking to improve and expand on the information to make it a usable document for everyone. One of the biggest changes in the beginning is we have done more work behind the asset overview. We've expanded those definitions to those categories I mentioned, where you can find more about the assets in that category that the county has. And then also some discussion about the selection process for projects and what committees are involved in making those recommendations to you as a board as those projects go forward. So that should start on page 8 of your document and go through page 16. Then on the forms themselves, primarily the standard form, I just want to point out to you that we have changed that form just a little bit, again, to make it more usable. At the very top, you will now see the total project cost, where that information used to be down on the form a little further. Further down on the form, we still have the detail of the project cost and the resources that are being used for the projects. And we've added 2 different pieces to those detail sections. We've detailed where we might be using county internal costs. A good example is like road projects. Many times we're using our public works staff. And so we want to identify the cost of it that is part of their salaries, benefits, or material and services that you find within our budget versus what's contracted out. And then we've, in the financing side, also highlighted our county capital fund. That fund is funded by departments paying a depreciation charge, basically a usage charge when they're occupying a county building. And so just to help the facilities committee managing that fund, we've highlighted when there's a request to use that fund. You'll also notice that there is a question up at the top of that form for America Rescue Plan funding. Those are, obviously you have that discussion here, I believe, after this presentation. So you'll be talking about American Rescue Plan projects. So those have not been approved by you, but that's a place we want to highlight as we finalize this plan, where we might be using American Rescue Plan funds for a project. Briefly just showing you a summary of the types of projects throughout the plan, predominantly road and bridges, about 86–87%, followed by solid waste, facilities, parks, and then technology. Also over the 5 years, we've tracked some of our project types have further out planning processes than others. You can see that roads does a 5-year plan. Some of our others are still working to get there. So on our building and facilities, our facilities committee is working on that longer term, looking out 5 years. So that's why you see predominantly road projects being shown right now in the out years. And then projects are funded by a variety of sources. So I mentioned the American Rescue Plan, the capital fund, but it's also the road fund. General fund can be used. Lots of times it might be user fees, such as out at solid waste or technology projects. So different state grants, just so everyone's aware of where does the funding for these projects come from. It's not just one bucket. It really does come up from a lot of different sources. And then we're continuing, the board will see the non-road and bridge projects come back to you for delegated authority. So this document and this process doesn't circumvent any of those processes that we've had over the years. They will come to you when projects are awarded and get your delegated authority to move forward. Finally, linked to the county budget, as I mentioned, this starts next year. So we will take this draft plan as departments refine their standard projects, meaning those are ready to go. They will build those into the budget. There's a chance that some of these pre-planning forms will become ready by the time you see the budget, but they will put those amounts into the budget, and then we continue to refine through supplementals as needed as projects are developed and finalized. So with that, I would just be looking if the board has any input on the plan itself. If there's anything you think you want to see differently, this would be a great time to give us that feedback. And we will plan to come back to you in July with a final CIP document for you to actually adopt.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moody. And I already see a hand. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Moody. Just a beginner question. Can you tell me the difference between or explain fleet system versus the actual fleet, the vehicles themselves?
Sure. In that case, the one that we have thought about, thank you, Commissioner Trieger, is related potentially to electric vehicles and maybe the system of having charging stations. So that is one that you may well see come forward versus the vehicle, but there's probably not a lot for the fleet system, but that's the type of thing we're thinking of.
Helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like we've always had a very strong CIP plan, so I appreciate the updates. It seems some years there's waves of certain things that flow through versus others. For example, like you mentioned, not as much fleet this time, but I'm sure we'll see a wave in a future year for doing that. And it's good just for the public to remind them that each and every one of these items listed is a project in and of itself that takes an entire team to actually flesh through and deliver to the public. So these are, these cumulative represent a lot of work that the county is doing. And I appreciate the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? I see no other commissioners. Ms. Moody, you said this would be a good time, but you also said you'll be coming back in, was it July of 2022?
Correct. Thank you, Chair Bernie. We'll come back in July with a final plan. So if you were wanting to see us change this document in any way, or if you feel like there's information missing, this would be a great opportunity to tell us that if there's any feedback in that way. But otherwise, we will move forward with finalizing things and bring you back a final document for adoption.
Thank you. My question was, is there a drop dead certain date by which you need further input if commissioners want to study this further? This is a lot.
It is, yeah, almost 160-page document now as it gets larger. So we will you have at least a few months. I could find a drop dead date for you if you want, but we will be developing the budget, so we'll be focused on that side of it. And then once departments have finalized their budget, we will send these forms out to them again and say, can you please now update these to match what you're planning for the next year? So at least several months.
Okay, so I know your excellent work and the excellent work of staff, but it sounds like commissioners still have 2 or 3 months where if they want to provide input to you, that would be okay.
Yes, Chair Bernie, yes.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, oh yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
So sitting on the facilities committee all these years, it's great to see this continually be developed and refined. I understand that there's a prioritization matrix that's going to be applied to these projects. And maybe I just missed it in the presentation briefly. Is that the matrix and the criteria in the plan?
So Commissioner Bozovich, Chair Bernie, that is specific to the facilities projects. So it wouldn't, that matrix won't be used for every category of project. So that is something that facilities committee will use, yes, as you prioritize your project. Each committee has their own process. So that's actually part of, I should have mentioned why you see me coming back to be the one presenting this. We realized that having roads and facilities only come to you kind of left some people out of the process. And this really is a countywide, many different types of category projects. We're kind of looking at it countywide when I'm presenting you the whole document. And then you have your individual committees that are really going to focus in on those specific project categories and make recommendations to you through the plan. Does that help?
That helps somewhat. It kind of, although some of these projects will actually compete for the same bucket of money, or same buckets of money. So facilities projects may be competing with roads or technology projects for ARPA money or some other bucket of money. So I was kind of looking to see if there was some way we were trying to sort these all a little bit high level beyond just the facilities projects. And that's was kind of where my question was leading. But I think at least on the ARPA, we have some prioritization criteria purely for that bucket of funds also. So there may be some others that are competing for our capital funds that are not purely facilities. So we'll keep working through that, I guess, as we move on. But I just want to make sure that, when we brought out the idea that things are being prioritized, that they're just not getting, moved up or down in the schedule or funded or unfunded willy-nilly, that we are trying to put some kind of criteria against all these projects, because there's way more projects in this plan than we've got money for.
Yeah, Commissioner Bozovich, Chair Bernie. So yes, there is definitely prioritization happening, as I mentioned, within those committees when they're looking at funding sources. The one comment I should probably make about the capital fund is it is funded specifically by a facilities usage charge. So that is why at this point it is used for facilities. Not that that couldn't change in the future, but it's kind of built on that model in order to keep that maintenance of our facilities specifically going. And then, as you mentioned, yes, the American Rescue Plan funds will have that process where you're going to follow that prioritization. So basically, you will be prioritizing the projects to use that funding source, and we will loop those into the plan as we go forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Ms. Moody. And thank you, Commissioner, having served with you and others on the Facilities Committee for a few years. I also had that question about how priorities worked into the formula, so thank you. Any other comments, questions? Ms. Moody, this is a discussion item. Do you have what you need from commissioners at this time?
I do. Thank you, Chair Bernie.
Thank you so very much. We are on now item 12B, order 21-12-14-08 in the matter of allocating American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, funding to proposed projects. And Steve, we'll let you take it away with your team.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. So while Robert Tintle brings up a presentation that he's going to walk through, and we have Robert, who's our American Rescue Plan Manager, and Christine Moody, our Budget and Financial Planning Manager, here with us today. I just wanted to, had a few questions, and we've had some conversations about the process that we've gone through so far. We've been in front of the board a couple of times to talk about the use of funds, where the board's high-level priorities are, and get some early direction from you. We have shared with you that we've created a steering committee that's comprised of elected and appointed department heads and key staff within the organization. We've taken the board's priorities and developed a methodology with which to rank and score various funding needs in the organization. So we've attempted to marry the board's priorities with an objective process that brings forward to the board recommendations. But I also want to say that there's a real opportunity and need for the board to ultimately prioritize, particularly in those areas that fall sort of outside of the nuts and bolts of the ARPA fund. So I'll just, as a general statement, say what you're going to hear today in the recommendations. You see several tiers of funding needs. Tiers 1 and 2 essentially represent the nuts and bolts of the ARPA funding. They are, particularly for the state and local assistance piece, which Mr. Tinta will walk through. But of that direct allocation that Lane County and city governments are each receiving, for us, tier 1 and 2 are really those nuts and bolts, both ensuring the financial stability of our public agency and responding directly to COVID-19 needs in the community. That's what tiers 1 and 2 really are structured to be. When we start getting to tiers 3 and 4, as much as we've attempted to have an objective process to review and score and rank and recommend those areas to you, they really do require ultimately the Board of Commissioners to have that conversation. So I just wanted to start with that there's, we're bringing forward to you our best work to date and based on feedback you've given us to date, but we recognize there's still a lot of conversation and prioritization and feedback that commissioners and the community need to have on that. So our hope would be that at the very least we can move forward with the nuts and bolts pieces of the recommended funding and allow for the necessary time and discussion and debate among the commissioners for those further tiers to allow for your discretion and prioritization around those. So we're very happy to be with you to continue this process of working through this critical funding to help both support the short and long-term financial stability and emergency needs of our organization and of our community. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Tintel, who's going to walk through the presentation, and then we'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mokryski. Chair Bernie, committee, I just want to make sure you see the screen. Is that correct? The PowerPoint?
We do. Yes.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to start with an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act, just to remind the board of what we discussed previously, but also in case there's other people that are viewing in for the first time, that they have a quick overview of what the American Rescue Plan offers. Just as a reminder, it was passed and signed into law on March 11, 2021. It was a $1.9 trillion bill that the US Congress did pass. The American Rescue Plan is made up of different buckets of funding sources. There was relief specific to individuals, specific to businesses, schools, health and pandemic areas of concentration, and then also the state and local assistance that Mr. Mokryski referred to earlier. And that's what we're going to concentrate on today, is the funding to cities and counties. Another way to look at it is, here's the piece of the pie. We're the red piece, red highlighted, outlined piece of the pie. It's $350 billion. That's specific to state and local governments. So they refer to that as coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. The allocation for cities and counties was $130 billion. Counties across the US got $65 billion, and cities also got the other half at $65 billion. Total in Oregon, we're receiving $4.26 billion. The state will receive a direct allocation from the US Treasury of $2.6 billion. And then locally, Lane County, our direct allocation is $74 million. We'll receive in 2 payments. And then also Eugene, Springfield, and other cities are getting their own allocations. Total Lane County geographic area will receive $132 million total through all agencies of this portion of ARPA funding, the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. As stated, Lane County, as an organization, we're going to receive about $74 million. We did receive the first half of funding in May of 21 of $37 million. Sorry, we'll get 74. And we expect to receive the second half of funding in May of 22 of $37 million again. As a reminder, the US Treasury is very specific about the eligible uses of funding with the ARPA funds, and they broke it out into 4 categories labeled with letters. Obviously, the most important forefront is support the public health response. So there's an ongoing emergency to make sure we still have funds available for that, and also to address the negative economic impacts of the pandemic that it's had on our community as well. Secondarily, in category B, they label premium pay for essential workers. Category C is replace public sector lost revenue. This is really to provide the government the financial stability and ongoing resources it needs to continue to provide the vital services that it provides on a daily basis, getting at those core services. Finally, category D, it's focused on infrastructure for water, sewer, and broadband. U.S. Treasury further broke out the eligible expenditure categories into 66 categories. So when you're looking at how to spend funds, it has to fit specifically within one of the 66 expenditure categories. Oops. Of course, we just can't use the funds for everything we want to. U.S. Treasury did identify 4 specific areas where you are not allowed to use ARPA funds. You're not allowed to deposit the funds into any pension account. You just can't put the funds in reserves or a rainy day financial reserves. You can't spend it on general infrastructure outside of water, sewer, and broadband, with some exceptions. And you can't spend it on debt service or legal settlements. I want to remind you where we've been thus far in the board's action to date. So in May of 21, as mentioned, that's when we received our first allocation of $37 million from the U.S. Treasury. And at that time, that same month, the board adopted the American Rescue Plan guiding principles and priorities. Also in May of 21, that's when we started the internal steering committee. It was created where we started meeting regarding this process. I last came to you in October of 2021 with an American Rescue Plan scoring matrix, so we can look at projects, proposed projects, and what types of criteria should be used when we're evaluating those. We were asked to come back with an initial allocation for the first payment we received from Treasury of $37 million plus or minus what we needed to get things moving, come back with those proposals, and that's what we're doing here today. We're also asked about setting aside or agreed to a contingency of $4 million. So let's not allocate the full $74 million up front. We have to make sure we maintain a $4 million contingency for the unknown, the unforeseen emergencies. If, again, another Omicron or some other variant comes out, we need to be able to respond to that. And finally, community engagement process. Originally, it was asked that after we allocate the first tranche, the first payment of funding from the U.S. Treasury, let's begin a community engagement process for that second tranche of funding that we should receive from the U.S. Treasury. What we've been doing in between May through October, and actually through today in December, is the steering committee, which is the internal committee of most department directors and elected officials in there. We've been meeting bi-weekly to review projects, review criteria, review information from the board, suggest proposals coming forward today. We did bring together 84 projects developed based on the guidelines from the board and the Treasury. And then we are recommending tiers, as Mr. Mokrahesky mentioned, tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4 tiers that we broke them out into tiers of to consider of projects. Just a reminder, not that you have to read this screen, I just want to remind you that there are 13 categories in the Arp Scoring Matrix, and the first 5 categories were based on the guiding principles and priorities that the board first approved in May. And number 1 priority was supporting the COVID response to decrease the spread of the virus. Secondly was to provide the continuity of vital services and rebuild financial security. That's that revenue replacement piece. Look at projects that are financial stability, sustainability, and one-time funding. Look at addressing deferred maintenance of projects over existing assets, and then also leverage other funding. Then we also looked at the 3 county strategic lenses of financial stewardship, equity lens, and impact lens. And then we used 5 other criteria that we had brought to the board as well. So there was a a thorough process of vetting the projects that were presented going forward. So now I do want to talk a little bit about the tiered projects that we brought forward on tier 1. And please note that these are rounded to the nearest thousandth for ease of projects. And when we get into other projects, except for revenue recognition, some of the projects are based on the best available estimates that we had at the time when it comes to the cost of the project. This first tier, tier 1, these are the revenue replacement for the provision of government services. So this is maintaining the vital services that we typically provide, the core services of the government. And these are actual lost revenue amounts that we did experience in fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. So the first tier of projects that we're asking for approval for is totals $9.7 million, made up of a variety of funds and programs across the county. And this is an eligible use within the U.S. Treasury, and it's the second priority from the county Board of County Commissioners as well. Next, we moved into tier 2 of projects. And right after the revenue recognition piece, or the revenue piece of where we lost revenue, we wanted to look at what are costs for the ongoing response to the COVID-19 pandemic and costs required to support the ongoing capacity demands within the organization of responding to the pandemic, responding to the needs of implementing projects that may move forward. And these costs total about $8.5 million. You might have seen over the weekend in the news, one of the items that was referenced was the $85,000 for the refrigeration trailer for the morgue to increase morgue capacity. So a lot of these have to deal with the COVID response, the medical death investigator, the refrigeration trailer, the ARP administration of the program, and also its positions to really support the ongoing effort within the response to the emergency. For example, H&HS fiscal staff, they've been responding to all the demands without providing for additional fiscal support for the FEMA reimbursements, all the other reimbursements. So this provides that capacity within that department there. So those are the tier 2. So tier 1 is a revenue replacement. Tier 2 is the ongoing cost recovery or response costs that we've had to date. Then we moved into tier 3. And this really gets to of the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds prioritization matrix, excuse me. So when we looked at the 84 projects that were proposed internally that really have a community impact as well, a number of them did. We used that scoring criteria that was approved by the board and rated them. And these are the 4 that were top rated. And these are for consideration today, whether to include them or not include them at this time. One was for Behavioral Health Crisis Center. Secondly, Courtroom Digital Modernization, Adult Corrections Facility, and South Lane Clinic. And just so you know, these are not listed in priority item as far as priority order here. They were just the top 4. And these top 4 total 25.9. And why we stopped there is because our first allocation was based on $37 million. And this gets us roughly to, I think it was about the $44 million mark. So real close to it was a good cutoff and break off there. Those were the tier 3 projects. Our 4th tier project, before I get to our 4th tier, just as a reminder, this packet was submitted a couple prior to a strategic planning meeting that we had, as you all know, where we learned more about what are the strategic priorities for Lane County that the community has started commenting on. And just as a reminder, they were affordable housing, public safety, community health, well-being, and the maintaining outdoor spaces. But there was a lot on homelessness, more affordable housing, more robust mental health and social services. So those are what we're hearing already through the strategic planning process. And since this packet was first originally submitted, we also became aware of a timing issue with 4 of the projects that were in the tier 4A category, which is included in your packet. So speaking with Health and Human Services, these 4 time-sensitive and high-priority items, really we would request the board to consider moving those forward with the recommendation today, even though it's not tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. These are part of 4A that really due to the housing projects, to keep housing projects moving forward, and the urgency of the moment, that these are time critical ones that we would like the board to consider moving forward with this first recommendation. And so that's an adjustment to what you had in your packet. So consider Tier 4A additional projects, the ones that are added here. As mentioned, we broke out Tier 3 was the top 4 projects, but then the remaining 55 projects, we just categorized into, they're all of these projects have value, all are important, but when we were doing the scoring, there was some natural breaks within the scoring criteria. And so we just categorized those into A, B, C, D, or E. And they just happen to spread about evenly also within the number of projects, although you can see there's a dollar value difference within each of those projects. Your packet, which was also quite lengthy, included all of the 84 projects, descriptions on all the 84 projects that were there. And so there are a lot of descriptions on what makes up all of these. And so really the feedback we'll be requesting later too is think about Tier 1, Tier 2 projects moving forward, maybe the 4A, any of the projects in Tier 3 or any from 4A through E. That'll be the discussion for the board today on how we should proceed with moving funding from this first tranche of money that we received from the U.S. Treasury. Just as a reminder, as we talked about previously, originally we were going to use the second tranche, the second payment of funding from the U.S. Treasury, which we expect in May of 2022, that we would like to have a public engagement process where we're meeting with the community and ask the community on the priorities they have for spending the ARP funding, the American Rescue Plan funding that we should be receiving. It may or may not be similar to the strategic planning process or strategic planning engagement that we already have. They could be similar. We already are hearing certain themes through that process, but we'd like to expand specifically with the American Rescue Plan. We'd like to develop a tool in January and in February go out and launch it, have the targeted feedback sessions and meetings online and through some various methods, targeted outreach to our boards, our commissions, groups we already meet with as well as those underrepresented groups that we want to bring to the table and hear from. And then in March or April, compile the results and bring those back to the board and present the information that we heard from the public through that process as well. So again, the recommendation and consideration for discussion for the board is Tier 1 and Tier 2, move forward with those projects. That's about 18.2 million. Consider Tier 3 projects, there's 25 million in that. Consider adding the proposed 4A project additions that I added here today. And then any 4A, B, C, D, and E categories that you may want to include at this time, or move all the projects forward to the public engagement process to help inform the allocation of projects that we will fund with the second payment from the U.S. Treasury. As a reminder, the projects that were already brought forward with the needs within the county of 84 projects totaled about $100 million. So the need is already great of eligible and worthy projects, but we would like to move forward with the engagement process as well. With that, that's the end of my formal presentation. We would like to turn it back over to the board for discussion, action, potential motion, and see what we can do. I will, on the call, I am joined by Ms. Gaffney, Karen Gaffney from Health and Human Services to answer any questions related to their projects. The sheriff is also on the line and available for projects, along with the DA, Patty Perlow, who also has projects on the list, and Steve Mokrahysky and Christine Moody are also available. So we turn it back over to you, Chair Bernie, and we encourage the conversation.
Is that all? That's all the staff you have? Actually, you've got Greg Rickoff too. Thank you very much. Commissioners, that's a lot. Questions, comments, discussion. Vice Chair, did I see your hand up?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. Start the timer and stop me at 45 minutes, okay?
You got it.
Actually, that was a bit tongue in cheek, but so A couple of quick general questions. Actually, first, a note of compliments. Mr. Tyndall, your team did a superb job, and I know it was gut-wrenching, it was time-consuming, and it took all of your resources to bring us this list. A great deal of thought went into it. You've added a little bit of latitude for the board to act. That's good administration practice. I'm familiar with that practice, and I think at this point we'll engage in that just a little bit. But I have a couple of questions regarding the cutoff line is at tier 3 and tier 4A. If I were to make some recommendations and the board would agree with me to divide some of the things up out of tier 3 and maybe even tier 2 and drop them into tier 4, I'm going to suggest that if they're taken from tier 3 and put into tier 4, that they are removed from the public process and placed ahead of the public process so that they actually do they do receive funding as if they were in tiers 1 through 3. Is that clear? That they'd be removed from the public process that you've described that would begin in January, which I do. I love the public process because it allows a great many people to be involved in pushing forward the priorities. So I'm seeing you nod just a little bit, Robert. Was that a good nod or solid nod? Am I inside?
Vice Chair Parr, thank you. Yes, that could be correct.
Then I'll ask the board to give me a little bit of latitude as I do make a couple of recommendations, because you've identified the NEL and you've identified the Brooklyn Avenue project as both from line 60 and line 70. They're small subsets of line 60 and line 70. I agree with that, moving them up to immediate funding, because those are helping people right away. You know, during our board strategic process, we talked about housing and homelessness as being far and above the #1 item that we are all keenly interested and aware of, and we're not the only ones. It seems to be fairly universal with our constituency. So I've found a couple of other items in tier 4B, in tier 4A, that really I think we should consider moving up into more immediate funding, so it doesn't have to wait until May. Items that potentially can have immediate impact on the people we are trying to serve, the people in the greatest need at this time of year in particular, and begin to get some projects moving without having to wait till after the public process in May. And those items specifically are, it's line 29. You can see it on there. It's housing and homeless service operations for $2.01 million. $2 million. The next is line 64, which is provider network capacity building. And that is at $1.4 million as listed here. The third that I've identified is line 28, which is homeless street outreach services, which we already are engaging in, but people who have been involved in that understand that we can do a far more thorough job if we put more resources into that. That's at $2.4 million. And a fourth one is what is identified as line 70, the shelter and navigation services for individuals experiencing homelessness. Now, on those 4 items that I'm identifying, I don't know that every single penny of those, the amounts listed there, need to be allocated before May. But I believe they need to go above and beyond the public process and put into an absolute process. So these are things that we as a board would prioritize, if board members would agree with me, and that we place them into a tier. Well, really, those would go into tier 3 in my scenario. So we've got a total of $10.3 million between those 4. It's actually a little bit more than that, because line 60 isn't included in my calculations, and line 60 is the net is the permanent supportive housing for the NEL. That's a small amount, relatively small amount. So we're looking at $10.3 million. And my scenario on this, and bear with me in just a second, is if we take 80% of that, reduce that combined total to $8 million, that means that in order to maintain the 43.972 approximately, which is the cutoff at the end of tier 3, we would need to find about $8 million as either in tier 2 or tier 3 to move into that hazy category in between that's before the public process. It's absolute, but isn't funded immediately, that may be funded as late as May of 2022. Now, Robert, am I being fairly clear on that? I'm trying to be as straight as I can. So what I'm saying is moving $10.3 million from Tier 4A into the immediate allocation to Tier 3, and then but reducing that total amount by 20%. So we're not moving $10.3 million. We're moving about $8 million into Tier 3, in which case we'd need to find about $8 million that's in Tier 3 or Tier 2. Mr. Morgreis, and you would prefer that we didn't look into Tier 2, but I've identified an item in Tier 2 that potentially could wait for funding. So is everybody nodding with me? Everybody understanding whether or not you agree with me at this point? Are you understanding what I'm saying? That we move about $8 million, the items that I've identified, from Tier 4A into Tier 3 for immediate funding prior to a public process, and that we move 20% of those items into a pre-public process, into Tier 4A, but not in part of the public process, that it will be absolutely funded in the May and separated from the rest of the items that are going through a more public sounding process. Which brings us to, how do we get $8 million out of Tier 2? Excuse me, out of Tier 3 and or Tier 2 to drop down to replace those, so that we keep at the $43.9 million. And I have those, I have some potentials identified, but the discussion there is would be, how do we find it? And so I have a couple of items identified. So I'm looking around, I look around the board right now, and I'm looking at some puzzled faces, but some also smiles a little bit. I'd like to hear comments on what I've said, or I'll wait until people talk about what they want to say. Chair Byrne, put me back in, because I think I'll be answering questions on this, and I'm going to be fairly insistent on some of this. Thank you.
Vice Chair, I was just wondering when you wanted me to set the buzzer off to stop you. No,
well, it's 45 minutes, but I think I'm inside of that. So.
I see Commissioner Trieger's hand up. Okay, gotcha, Commissioner Bozovich, after Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Farr. I want to make sure, I think I'm following and I think I'm agreeing, but I want to just confirm a thing or two and ask a question of staff. And I also want to couch it in, we're talking about public process, but the items that you're talking about, we've been in public process about what are people's priorities for years. When you consider public process just being what all of us hear at various, events and town halls and through comments and emails and our work in the community. So I just want, for anyone watching to, the public process is going to help shape in what order how much money goes to which of the things we've identified, but we're in a constant public process hearing from people about the very issues that you've just raised as wanting to have rise to the top for this tranche. If I'm understanding also, this is about sequencing how we release dollars more than it's about what are our priorities, that they're all still our priorities, and that we're just talking about releasing the dollars in a way that maybe lines up with the delivery of services and the needs a little differently. And so we're not necessarily asking for project or line items to compete with one another for the dollars, but more for the timing with which we to which we allocate them. I see you nodding, so I'm taking that as that I'm following what you're getting at. So if that for the moment, I think if that's all, if I'm following you and that all sounds to fit with what you're suggesting, I'm on board, and I'll listen to a little more conversation and see if I have more questions. But between what you're saying, what I read here, and what I understand, that's where we are. Is that?
That is precisely what I'm indicating, Commissioner Trieger. None of this falls off the end of the plank. We're not discarding anything. It's just timing of when the dollars are finally appropriated. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's fairly safe to say there probably will be another round of comments, but right now, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I want to, make one thing clear. There's more projects than we have allocated money coming from the federal government. So something will fall off. I just want to make sure that's understood, because my question is about how they rank the sustainability, fiscal sustainability. Because as I went into looking at the individual projects, particularly some of the ones under 4A, I get that tier 1 and tier 2 don't necessarily have to have as much fiscal sustainability demonstrated because it's about replacement of revenue or paying for services that are supposed to be for the COVID emergency. When you drop down below that, one of our criteria was it either is one time or sustainably funded or temporary use of funds. And as I start reading some of these projects like 28, 29, 60, 64, they all sound like they're funding a program that I don't think any of us would intend to start and then discontinue. Whether it's the permanent supportive housing operations and services, or it's homeless outreach, they're showing basically 3.5 years of funding that program and then nothing. But it's being scored with, it's a one-time. If the box is checked on that particular program as a one-time expenditure, or doesn't need sustainable funding, or doesn't need to identify sustainable funding, to me, all of those boxes should have been unchecked, and they should have had to identify sustainable funding, or they shouldn't have been given a 4 or 5 score in that particular category. And that completely changes the matrix. So I would like to hear from staff how those programs were scored as one time or no need for additional funding, when I just can't imagine us expanding those programs and not wanting to have them go beyond 2.5 or 3 years.
I see Mr. Rickoff's hand up, and you did ask staff for a response. So Mr. Rickoff.
Yes, Chair Bernie, Commissioner Bosevich, very good point. We've been attentive to that all the way through. With some of these projects, they are your commitments. Things like the Low Barrier Shelter Navigation Center. We have known that it's part of the TAC recommendations. It's moving forward. We know we have a commitment to funding it into the future. Even if we do not know right now how we will get that funding going. It's high on the list of items for Alex Kyler to deliver for the organization. We're going to continue to work on those items. I would say behavioral health is in that similar category. Most of these housing programs and the shelter programs that you're seeing do fit into the TAC recommendations, have been things we've been talking about. We don't have the ultimate solution for an existing funding stream, but we do have a pretty powerful opportunity to get 3 or 4 years of work for these essential projects that we will then continue to worry like a dog with a bone to find that ongoing funding. The other piece that I would like to mention, and I think Commissioner Trieger is absolutely right, Commissioner Farr as well. This is sequencing and timing, and please know another piece that's at play here is that Alex Kyler has this list and is working this list and does expect some of these things to find funding through infrastructure dollars, other state direct apportionments, and or grant opportunities for security and safety options. So if this list is right in terms of what you want to accomplish, we are going to get inventive and active with every tool at our disposal.
Chair Bernie, might I add just a little bit to Greg Rickoff's answer to that? Because I know that several of the projects were—
yes, go right ahead.
We're specifically in Health and Human Services. So I just add a little bit. I absolutely agree with everything that Mr. Rickoff said. And on some of those projects, we do have sustainable funding identified. It really varies by project. So for instance, we talk about the Behavioral Health Crisis Center. We know that there's significant movement at the state level and Medicaid dollars and other pieces that will help us enable that program to move forward. And then there are others like the Shelter Navigation Center that I think Mr. Rickoff's example is perfect, that has been a priority of the board. We know you want to move that forward. This ARP money would give us for the next 4 years, which allows us that time to do the search for the ongoing funding rather than delaying getting those projects moving. So I hope that helps. It was clear that it was one-time money, and that's why the box was checked.
Commissioner Bozovich, you still have the floor.
Yeah, I still have to respectfully disagree with the fact that those were scored as funding has been identified, or under the fiscal sustainability one-time funding, that funding has been identified for multiple year programs, sustainability or one-time funding. What I just heard described was their priorities, and we're going to find a way to fund them. That is not funding has been identified. So, and I do agree that the crisis center, that's something we clearly have some permanent funding, long-term funding. There might be some gaps. When it comes to some of these other issues, like the permanent supportive housing piece, the expansion of some of our homeless services, there has been no continuous funding identified. Yes, it's a big priority of the board, but we haven't, which means that they should have been scored lower under that portion of the matrix. And I wonder where they would end up if they were scored accurately. And a lot of what Vice Chair Farr is proposing to move forward in the matrix into funding are items that I think were incorrectly scored when it comes to fiscal sustainability. So that's where I'm having a real problem about even talking about moving stuff around. I'm fine with the first 3 tiers and stopping there. I don't want to add anything from 4A because I believe from 4A down, there's been some misscoring, and we need to have a serious conversation about that. Because when you start adding up the annual cost roll up over the years of this, we do not have that identified. And in fact, if you look at our long-term projections for funding in this county, we're going to be looking at some serious deficits 2 or 3 years out. And that's not responsible to have those scored so highly when we don't have permanent, sustainable funding identified. They should be receiving either a 1, 0, 1, 2, or 3, not a 4 or 5 in that category. And I wonder how that would shift the whole program. So at this point, if you want me to vote for this board order, stay with the way the board order is written. Tiers 1, 2, and 3. Start moving stuff out of 4 up, I'm going to have to vote no.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck, did I see your hand?
Thank you. Although I do believe there are other people in front of me.
Oh, actually, there's no commissioners that have not yet spoken other than you and I.
I think, since we have limited time.
We're not getting around, so we're fine.
Okay. I was tracking what Commissioner Barr was saying, and the heartbreak is all of these issues are, everything listed is so vital, and we want to do them all, and we know we can't. So my question for you, Vice Chair Barr, is where would you remove the 8 million? Because that's the part that gets really hard. I totally agree with all the other items you want to add because they're completely vital to what we have stated on our strategic plan and our important services. So that's my first question. I also want to give an opportunity for the sheriff to speak a bit about the big ticket items he's got in tier 3, because I'm not sure the public really understands what all might be involved in that large item.
Sheriff?
You bet. I appreciate that question, and obviously it does have a big price tag. A little bit of background on where that project came from. Actually, pre-COVID, we had started a project around utilizing DLR services, so corrections architects, to come in and take a look at our jail and tell us a couple of things. One, how could we be more efficient with the way that our jail is constructed? And 2, do some future planning to lay some planning in place for future needs for the community. So that actually kicked off pre-COVID. It was delayed a little bit because of COVID. The DLR architects weren't able to travel for a period of time. But one of the things that, well, they basically did a full facility assessment once they were able to come check out the facility. And you all know from being on previous jail tours, we have that one portion of the jail that's sinking into the ground. That's actually a very, very vital part of our operation because it's located near our medical staff. And so that's where we house folks that are coming in off the streets, and they need to be looked at every 2 hours because they're we have concerns about them with their alcohol withdrawals or other substance withdrawals. So that was one piece that they were taking a look at. But while they were in our facility, you know, this is a group that has been around the nation building new jails. And so they're talking about what new jails look like and newer technology than what we have. And you all probably remember this, but our jail is actually constructed in 3 different decades. The main jail, the 3-story structure, is built in 79. The South Annex was added in 89, and then the North and East Annexes were added in 1999. So they were taking a look at our facility and talking about technology. Then COVID happened, and we started really having to bring technology in just so that the public safety system could continue to work. Parole and probation officers weren't meeting in person with their clients who were in custody anymore. Attorneys weren't meeting in person with their clients anymore, and court wasn't happening in person. So we stood up some courtrooms that function very much like this meeting is functioning right now in our visiting section where those in-person meetings used to happen. And that has worked, and it has helped the court system be able to continue to function. But when it comes to not spreading the pandemic or not exposing individuals to more individuals within the facility, we're still requiring an individual to leave the housing unit they're assigned, travel through the facility to go sit in a room with a computer. And so one piece of this rather large project is to have the capacity to bring somebody out of their housing unit and put them still within the housing unit, but in a private room with a computer so that they can do all those things without traveling all the way through the facility. That same space would also be used by our mental health specialists. And I think I've told you a couple of times, we're the only jail in the state that has 6 mental health specialists working in our jail. We have 16 hours a day, 7 days a week covered with mental health specialists so that if there's an individual who's in crisis in a housing unit, the deputies can call a mental health specialist out there to have a conversation and to try and de-escalate and help that person work through hopefully pre-crisis. The problem we have is there's not a good place for that conversation to happen privately. And so our mental health specialist comes down, but more often than not, we end up having to have a deputy standing nearby for the safety of the mental health specialist. That conversation is taking place in a hallway, not a private location. So part of this project would be the technology for basically a courtroom in every housing unit, but also a private space for mental health to have conversation. And then a huge amount of this is addressing deferred maintenance. And I think this is something also that commissioners you're aware of. If you look around at the facilities of Wayne County, you know, certainly we've had lots of conversation about the courthouse. The DA and I both live in the courthouse, but we also have an extensive amount of deferred maintenance over at our Wayne County Jail. The central control operates basically every door in that building, and it's operating on really old analog technology. And our maintenance specialists from time to time try to purchase the switches that we use on eBay so that they can stock up because they're oftentimes not available anymore. And so DLR took a look at our technology and said, wow, not sure anybody else is still running like that. And they've given us a plan to relocate our central control and upgrade technology. That project actually goes hand in glove with a project regarding our video within the jail that's been in process really since 2017, having to do with the amount of video that we have in the facility and video storage, which protects not only the adults in custody and the staff, but it protects the county from liability to be able to have an appropriate amount of video storage. And so we had already started a project with a third-party contractor to talk about video within the facility. When he heard we were talking about these other technology upgrades, he said, well, it would be ridiculous not to do them all at the same time. You'd be exponentially increasing your costs not to do this together. I know we have limited time. This is a big project, so I'm trying to go fast. But one other piece that's pretty important to mention is that if you built a new jail today, every jail cell would be required to have a call box in it where the person that's housed in that cell could push a button and summon help. There's not a single one of our single cells in our facility has that, because they were constructed before that was required. So our adults in custody are instructed, if they're in a single cell on the 3rd floor, they're instructed if they're having an emergency and need help, they kick the door until somebody comes running. This project would actually provide a call box in every single cell, which would be better, obviously, for communication for their needs. It allows deputies to address their needs much more quickly if it's a non-emergency need, rather than just whenever the deputy is on the tier. And then it's also going to allow for some staffing efficiency down the road, say on the graveyard shift when most adults in custody are sleeping. You could potentially have fewer deputy sheriff staff that are just walking up and down the tiers in case somebody kicks their door if you had this technology. I'm going to stop there. There's actually more to the project. I mean, the reality is we could probably have an hour-long meeting just on this project as indicated by its cost, but I'll stop there for now. And then if you want to come back around, I'm right here.
Commissioner Buck, do you still have the floor?
I appreciate that, Sheriff. And I guess I'll kick it back to Vice Chair Farr, because I'm curious where the other $8 million will come from that you were thinking.
Vice Chair, question was directed to you. I see Mr. Tintle's hand up if you'd like help there.
I have an answer, but it may change based on what Mr. Tindall says, but I do have a distinct answer for you, Chair, Commissioner Buck. Robert, if you want to go first.
Chair Burney, Vice Chair Farr, thank you for letting me interrupt the thought process, but I thought it may actually help you. Something to consider. One thing I didn't mention in these proposals, a lot of these, the costs are over a 3-year period. So we don't have to just commit, we don't have to just stay at a $37 million or $42 million number. Just remember, it's part of the full $74 million allocation. We expect the second half of payment as mentioned in May. So if you decide to go over whatever dollar amount you decide, threshold, you could go over that amount because we won't spend all, if you wanted to dedicate projects to a certain threshold, those projects could be available because we won't spend all the money in year 1. It's over a 3-year period. So I say that because if you want to reduce projects by 20%, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to do that, and that may make it more difficult because we'd still want the full project moving forward. So just something to consider. It may help in your deciding there.
So Mr. Tyndall, I want to let you know that there's one thing that Commissioner Bozovich and I have in common. We look at granular details, and honestly, for me, that just confused the issue even more. But Commissioner Farr, perhaps Commissioner Buck asked you the question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Tyndall, for that. I was aware of that not all of this money is going to be spent at once, so we can actually go well over what we have currently prescribed as what is the number? It's 43.9 in tiers 1, 2, and 3. So we could actually go beyond that and be fairly satisfied that we're not going to come close to spending the $34.5 million that initially $37.5 million that we initially have to spend. So Commissioner Buck, that's a part of the answer, is that many of these projects aren't going to come anywhere close to expending the entire amount that is allocated on the line that's dedicated to them. But I had a couple of items that really would add up fairly quickly to reduce a little, to alter the timing of the spending of the money very specifically. One of them would be what's identified as line XX in tier 2. Line XX is $2.7 million, which is a placeholder to maintain essential services. Well, I'd need to be convinced that needs to be allocated this early, that couldn't be pushed down and allocated certainly by May of next year, but placed into a different category, so that there's $2.7 million that can come from tier 4A to tier 3 or up above the line, whatever we would like to call that line. The second one is one that is really a front burner, high heat importance to me. And that's line 04. Which is the Behavioral Health Crisis Center. To me, there's nothing that we can spend money on that's going to have a greater impact immediately on the entire spectrum of the services that we provide. However, that's a lengthy process that gets that in place, and the $7 million is a part of what's needed only a part of what's needed over the long haul. So for this particular discussion, in my estimation, we could take as much as 3 or 3.5 from that and move it down on the priority list. So between those two, you're up to 6.2 already. And then I would talk to the sheriff about the 17.5. Some of that is in deferred maintenance. A large chunk of it is in deferred maintenance, which is certainly not going to be spent between now and May. So a certain amount of the 17.5, which would continue to guarantee is the granted amount, but a part of that could be reduced to move below the line. So quite easily we can come up with $8 million, just looking at a couple of specific big ticket items and then spreading the rest out among as Mr. Tyndall has suggested, taking a certain percentage off a number of the other items. So I think I would trust staff to perform that surgery, but I believe that it's relatively easy to do, since we're not taking money away from any of these projects. All of the projects listed, all the way down to $74 million, excuse me, is how much money we're going to get. So, anything above that line really falls into the quasi-guaranteed category that it will ultimately, by as early as May of next year, all of it will be allocated. And Commissioner Bozovic, I agree. I don't want to initiate programs that are going through. That's Commissioner Buck's questions. I'll come back to Commissioner Bozovic later. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry. Forgive me.
No, that was appropriate. Thank you.
I just want to share with everyone that every one of Commissioner Buck's questions has created a lot more information, and we need to Commissioner Buck, did you have any other comments?
Just one in response to Commissioner Farr. I mean, I think what you're essentially asking is that we go beyond tier 3 in approval and approve a few items in 4A that add up to 51 million-ish. And my only concern there is that that doesn't really give a lot left for the public process to review. I mean, I absolutely agree that those all are essential services and I'd love to fund them all. But I think that because you mentioned that that's still guaranteed money, that would essentially mean that we're just approving a lot more than the initial 37.5 that I thought we were coming into this discussion to do.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trigger, I was going to comment, but I know you've been having your hand up for a long time. Was there something you wanted to get in first?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate doing rounds, and it's a little disjointed because this was tagging on, but just briefly and for some clarification, the phrase one-time money, to my mind, can mean it takes money being spent once to sort of fix a thing or put a thing in place. And other times it's just committing and saying, this money is available this one time. And you got to do the best with it to leverage or to stabilize or to achieve something that puts you in a different position to perhaps need different or even lesser or more resources later, but it doesn't obligate us to be that source of funding in perpetuity. And so specifically, for example, when Commissioner Farr is talking about some of these items like provider network capacity building, in nonprofit land, we get capacity building grants all the time, and they are for a prescribed amount of money over a prescribed period of time with the understanding that with this resource, it allows you, service deliverer, to stabilize, to deliver more service, to build your capacity to then secure your own funding after this period of time for which we've funded you. So perhaps I'm misunderstanding or reading more into how the scoring was done, but I imagine, and I think this is what perhaps Commissioner Farr is getting at, that giving one-time money is valuable here to address certain needs, and it's not an obligation, it's not growing something and then leaving it hanging, it's providing resources one time to achieve a certain outcome. And in particular, I think the timing versus competition for dollar amounts in the life of this ARP allocation is important around the homelessness response and shelter capacity, because those needs are now. And I fully appreciate and support the needs, for example, at the jail that Sheriff was talking about. I've met with him and talked about it. I toured the jail myself, but the difference there of waiting for that allocation beyond May, as opposed to some of these more critical needs responses, is significant. And to leave sort of providers hanging, they can't come on and deliver services on a sort of short-term unknown basis. They need a little more long-term surety to really put their programs in place and deliver their services, and allow them the opportunity. And ideally, right, hopefully we deliver more of those kinds of services, and it stabilizes those folks and moves them into a different kind of need, where we're not funding what we just did to help move them through either that housing ladder or that navigation. So if I'm understanding, if staff wants to make any comment about what one-time funding means in the process of this scoring, but that's how I interpret it, and why it doesn't give me quite as much heartburn as as it might otherwise.
You can hear me now. Thank you, Commissioner. I have too much I want to say to be able to get it out as articulately as the sheriff always does. I really envy that. One, it's my understanding that the one-time payments have already been committed to. Is that correct or not, Mr. Mokrahajski?
Related to the placeholder, the $2.7 million item? Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's just a clarification.
And I think it's also fair to say, as a general, that items 1 and 2 really are items that have been identified in part, well, in large part, because the board prioritized financial stability and response to COVID as your top priorities. And 2, the vast majority, if not all of those in tiers 1 and 2 have already been obligated or committed to in some way. So it's also true that tiers 3 and 4, many of those things the county has already had a process for and committed to. Yeah.
My only question, I want to try and build here. My only question was, we've committed those dollars, and the answer is yes. Okay. I also want to say that I couldn't agree more with Vice Chair Farr's desire to elevate some of the homeless shelter and housing items that are right now needs. My opinion. To me, I'd elevate them further than he did. I would elevate them to one of the top 2 tiers, and I would only be comfortable approving tiers 1 and 2 now, because they don't add up to more than the 37 million that in agenda setting, it was my understanding that we were looking at this point. That's my opinion. I'm just sharing my opinion with the board, as we all have. So I personally would be in favor of a motion to, right now, I mean, when we're through this, adopt tier 1, tier 2, and those items that Commissioner Farr mentioned. I'm completely supportive of all other items, but now, Sheriff, if you correct me, please don't take too long, but my understanding was that it would be imprudent to embark on that $17 million worth of required retrofit piecemeal. That it would make, is that correct? That it would make sense to do that at one time?
If we're going to do all the things, they should be done as a combined project, but of course it will take a period of years to do it.
Thank you, sir. So I think we have time. That's the kind of the top thing in the next tier down. And that tier includes dollars that take us well above the first allocation. So I think we have time to discuss that a little more, is my opinion. Mr. Tintle, I want to disagree with, politely, with a couple of things that you mentioned. You said that the public engagement was to inform how we spend the next chunk of 37 million. Forgive my dog, I'm sorry. And yet now we're talking about maybe dipping deeper than that without public engagement. Public engagement's always ongoing, but without that, and what you described as a public engagement protocol is not at all, before you came on board in this position, what discussions with Mr. Mokraheisky were, which had to do with various key groups in the community literally making, providing input to the board in addition to what you suggested. And finally, the other piece of public engagement in my mind was there's an awful lot of ARPA dollars, much less infrastructure dollars, that we need to be positioned to compete for. It's not just part of the $74 million allocation. And the public input was not to derail us from funding any of these items, but it was to guide us in competing for even more dollars for Lane County. So I just want to get all of that off my chest. And I think I'm done. Thank you very much. Do we need another round now? It looks like we do. And I do want to mention, especially Commissioner Bozievich, I want to mention that the longer we take with this, the less likely we will. Yes, okay, please go ahead.
First, I wanted to acknowledge that Ms. Moody had her hand up a while ago, and
oh, I'm sorry. I
didn't know she had something she wanted to add in here.
Please, Ms. Moody, I didn't see. I apologize.
Oh, thank you, Chair Bernie. Commissioner Bozievich. So just on the points that have been made about one-time money, sustainability, whether we're creating places where we might have to fund in the future, I just wanted to bring up to the board that you do have a policy about one-time funding and grant funding in your financial policies that really does say that those programs sunset unless additional funding is identified. So that's definitely something that we're watching on all of these forms. And not to say that services are by any means easier to cut, but we're also watching for services versus maybe something like a capital asset that we would then have to maintain and might be harder to cut. So we really have put a lot of, we continue to talk a lot about that on the staff level of where do we have funding? Where is this going to be treated like a grant? Where, as Commissioner Trieger mentioned, we receive grants all the time and that funds it for a specific period of time. And then there is discussion and work done to find more sustainable funding. So we will continue to treat this funding just as we do any other funding coming into the county. Yes, it's a lot all at once, but we're definitely watching for to make sure that we leave ourselves better at the end of this. I think our motto was emerge stronger from this instead of creating any kind of demand on our existing county funds.
So thank you. And I'm so sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich, for helping my poor eyesight.
If I can tag on to that then with my second round here. You know, I've been at the county for a while. I've watched us take, you know, and we've got the DA and the sheriff on here, so they're well aware of our 416 program. So is Mr. Rickoff. It's a downward departure program we started under a federal grant that ended. It's a great program, keeps people out of prison. We've scrambled to fund that year after year in trying to keep people from going to prison for property crimes. And it's been a scramble. Started under a grant. We knew it was a grant at the time we got it, but now it's become an ongoing expense that we try and fill every year. My concern is there's so much of this we haven't talked about, whether it's truly one-time funding or not, or a program that we're not going to be able to discontinue. And those sort of discussions really ought to happen in our budgeting process, not in allocating some grant one-time federal funds. And as I look at the tier 1, 2, and 3, you know, tier 3, almost all those dollars are absolutely one-time expenses. for capital work. And one of the things we tried to make a high scoring thing was it was capital work that saves money in the long run, that adds efficiencies. So, diverting people to a crisis center out of the jail adds efficiencies in the long run as far as cost of operating our services. I am not comfortable going beyond tier 3 or jiggering any of this around, because tier 1, tier 2 clearly meet those criteria about either it was replacing revenue or expenditures clearly identified with the COVID emergency. So they are a one-time expense. They'll be over with eventually. Tier 3s are very high priorities of the county that are pretty clearly one-time expenses. You jump down into 4A and on beyond, and you get into things that I believe are possibly programmatic startups. And we need to have a longer discussion. We need to have that public input. We also need to have some financial projections for this county. We just adopted a $16 million increase to our ASME contract over the next 3 years. And there's a whole bunch of other issues coming up right now that are adding costs to the county budget daily, a 6.8% inflation rate, realizing that our taxes only increased about 3.5% a year from property taxes in our general fund. This is a much bigger discussion than this afternoon if we're going to go beyond tier 3. So I would like us just to move the board order as written, as publicized, and deal with the remainder later. I know, and I know that they're very critical services. A lot of money has been pumped into those services in the last year or 6 months from the legislature and the federal government, to the point where there's difficulty hiring in those fields. So we have time to discuss those and wrap them into a longer term budget process. So I hope the board will honor my request and go with the board order as printed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I support tier 1 through 3. But Commissioner Farr, Vice Chair Farr has some really good points that we are going into the winter season now. There are services that people need right now. They're very time sensitive, and I believe those programs are already in our budget. But we do know that we need to expand those services. And this is, we're still in COVID mode. We're going to be in COVID mode through the winter season. They still fully fall into acceptable categories for ARPA funds. So, I'm supportive of tier 1 through 3. And if those items that Mr. Tintle has mentioned, and those 4 additional items are time sensitive to serve people right now who are on the streets in very cold weather, as we know today, we'll be going through COVID through the winter time, and it won't be the only time. They need to be sheltered, and that means life or death. And I will support those additional items.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Mr. Rickoff.
Just very quickly to Commissioner Buck's point, truly, these are still COVID response times. We do not have the congregate sheltering that we once had, so it can clearly be seen as COVID response.
Thank you. Other commission? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarifying, in tier 3, the technology upgrades that we heard about from Sheriff, and again, I don't think anybody here disagrees that those are necessary and doesn't support those, but that is there benefit, again, sequencing and timing wise, not priority or commitment wise, to moving that out of tier 3 to make room for these other pieces that Commissioner Farr is talking about, knowing that there's a difference between those dollars being actually allocated before May versus allocating them after May. relative to the difference between allocating the dollars for the services that Commissioner Farr has mentioned. I guess that's a question for Vice Chair Farr and or the sheriff, if that makes sense. That's a question.
Well, the sheriff's been pretty clear. Sheriff Harold, do you have anything to say about that to respond to Commissioner Trieger? Because I'm prepared to make a motion.
I guess it just depends on if, as I've listened to the board, if what you're really talking about is actually allocating a larger number over the course of the ARPA, and we knew that we could get the work started, then it wouldn't matter. But of course, it's a significant project that's going to take a period of time. And so the window for spending the dollars does close also. So I don't know if that answer is helpful at all or not, but.
I think so. I think what I'm trying to get at is if I'm understanding, we're talking about the difference between dollars that we commit between now and May versus May forward, and the impact that they have on the services that will get delivered, and therefore on the community. If I'm understanding from the specific items Vice Chair Farr referenced relative to that one, and I'm only picking on that one because of the large price tag, and it makes it an easy one for five kind of swap in terms of timing and sequencing, is my question.
I think it's been answered, Commissioner. Anyone else before a motion is made? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
I'm sorry to keep going. I know we have other things on our agenda. Sheriff, if I may add to what you say, what's being said is that I kind of feel your need for wanting some kind of commitment for the board for servicing, all that's in the 17.5 million, moving it, to tier 2. I think maybe it could put some question as to our commitment towards funding for your division. And so for myself, I want to make sure that it's perfectly clear that I support your request. And I don't want you to I don't want to move the money amount around from different tiers. As much as I really, really want to fund the additional items that Commissioner Farr is in there, I also don't want there to be any thought that we would not, have the commitment to your department that I know that you desperately need, because this kind of money doesn't come around very often.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, were you through? If I may, I'd like to engage in the second round also. My sense is that there probably is consensus for moving forward with items 1 through 3 and 4B. Commissioner Farr, would 4B cover the items that you were concerned with?
Tier 4B,
Yeah.
Bernie?
Yeah.
Actually, the items that I'm concerned with came out of Tier 4A.
Okay.
So,
no, I hear you. But, and to move forward with this, though, I'd even support this, but here's what I would want. I would want a delineation of when these dollars would be spent. Of these dollars, what might potentially intersect with infrastructure dollars, which this county will be receiving. If in fact we move forward, can those infrastructure dollars be used to offset some of these so they can be placed to other priorities of the board? Do you see what I'm saying? I'd like a sort of a rigorous analysis so we can look at this, because there are some items, I'm sorry, I totally agree with Commissioner Farr. There are some items that are right now, and yesterday. And there are other items that I'd like to move forward with, because we need some certainty if we're going to move forward with a $17 million retrofit. But I'd also like to not move beyond that at this point until we we have a little more rigorous analysis. So I just wanted to throw that in. I hear, honestly, Vice Chair Farr, I don't know, having heard from Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Bozovich, if there will be support for this, but I myself would be willing to move forward with those 3 tiers and the items that you discussed.
Thanks, Chair Byrne. Then I can craft a motion to see how that sits with everybody.
Only one way to find out, please.
And then go back to my motion number. Is I move order 21-12-14-08 in the matter of allocating American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funding to proposed projects with a series of whereas, and then getting down to the therefore. Therefore, all items under item 1 and all items under item 2. Item 3 would add lines 70 at 4.56, lines 29 at 2.0, line 64 at 1.42, and line 28 at $2.4 million. And with an additional of Mr. Tyndall, the item for the NEL, which came out of line 60, a relatively small amount out of line 60, to be added into what is labeled number 3. And the items under 3, the items under 1 and 2 would be for immediate action by the administrator. Items under 3 would be for tiered distribution as determined by the administrator based upon the need for immediate funding. That is to say that we understand that all items in line in tier 3 aren't going to be spent immediately. That we're committing the money, but not all of it is coming out of this first. I believe we use the word tranche.
What is that? All one motion, Commissioner?
That's all one motion. I kind of what I'm saying is 1 and 2 intact. Item 3 adding 4 line items, but then item 3 being hierarchical in terms of the timeliness of the appropriation and to be determined by staff.
Thank you very much. Is there a second to that?
I will second.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. I couldn't possibly repeat that all, but I think we know. Mr. Tyndall, could you possibly repeat Vice Chair Farr's motion, identifying the line, the tiers and line items, and if you could you tell us what that total would be?
Yes. First, let me repeat it. What I heard is approve all the items in tier 1, approve all the items in tier 2. Tier 3 will move forward. I'll just say approve the items in tier 3. We're also going to move numbers 29, 64, 70, and 28, which were in 4A. We're also including the 2 items that Ms. Gaffney had brought forward under the 60, the NEL project. That equals 443,000 because number 70 is already included in Mr. Farr's proposal, Vice Chair Farr's. And I would have to add that up. Christine, did you happen to add that up yet?
Well, we can have a discussion on the motion if you wouldn't mind using that time to tell us the price tag. Thank you. Discussion to the motion. Well, then we need to know the price. Sorry, Mr. Tyndall, I tried. Yeah.
Chair, I have my hand up.
Forgive me, Commissioner Buck.
Just give some time to do calculations. I support all of these projects. They're all critical support projects. The only downfall, as I mentioned earlier, is it's just it's far more than the 37.5, and that's fine if that's what we decide is really important, and they are all important, and gives less to the second half of the money that's coming in for the public process. And yes, we've had public process along the way for many of these items. And they've all been issues on our strategic plan that we've wanted to fund. And I'm not necessarily on the fence. Like, these are really, really good items to fund. So I'm supportive that way. We just need to know, be clear about exactly what we're doing here today.
Mr. Tintle?
The total of all the projects add up to 54,878,000. So approximately 55 million.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion to the motion? Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner?
All right, trying to get unmuted. I had things covered up with a spreadsheet. I'd go back and look at something that I researched earlier. I'm going to respectfully have to vote no on the motion because I do believe we're reaching too deep into the funding, and we're not having a long enough discussion about some of these additional programs. I want to remind the board that we got a bunch of extra money that we allocated back on June 8th. And I only know the ones that I've got tracked here on a spreadsheet about one vendor, just because I could go back and grab it real quick. Rapid rehousing for families to St. Vincent de Paul for $2.2 million, multi-year contract. Motel emergency shelter services for $10 million, multi-year contract. Access Center for homeless families, over $300,000. Access Center for homeless adults, $2.3 million. Short-term housing for families, another $600,000. Homeless prevention for Eugene families, another $800,000. It's not like there aren't already programs in place dealing with some of these issues, and that we're not doing anything this winter. So the crisis description of having to add these programs in today, I think is not necessarily accurate. I think they're very important programs. I agree. I'm particularly supportive of the permanent supportive housing pieces. But I think we have to have a longer term discussion about our ability to fund these long term and where the county finances are going long term. And we just haven't had those conversations. So if they're going to go beyond tier 3, and particularly if you're going to start phasing tier 3, I have a problem with this motion. I'm going to be voting no.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or discussion? I think Commissioner Bozovich raises legitimate points. I think we need further analysis. However, I also know that this is one-time money enabling us to move on critical priorities that we've talked about, and now there's an opportunity. I think moving forward, Commissioner, forgive me, but when you said you're concerned about phasing, what exactly did you mean? Because I may misinterpret what you meant.
Commissioner's Farr's motion directed staff to look at the timing of expenditures in tier 3 and phase them out to try and extend some of them into the second payment in May. I believe that was basically what he said, which is basically going to phase tier 3 projects instead of knowing that they've got the funding up front so they can commit to the long-term full project.
Oh, I don't see that as, okay, got it. Let me say, I don't see that as an issue because the county received $37 million 7 months ago. The county has spent all this time going through a process to prioritize projects. The board has signed off on that. Take, for example, Sheriff, I hate to do this, but I'm going to again, take, for example, that kind of a building project. That money's not going to be spent in 5 months. In fact, I'd be surprised if initial spending occurred even before half a year. So I don't see that as an issue. But thank you, Commissioner. I mean, we may disagree on it, but I didn't know what you meant. So now I understand what you were saying. But I'm going to encourage us to think bigger. I'm going to encourage us to think that now that we have developed with Mr. Tintle eminently qualified heading up this division, with a grant writer, with looking at how we can exploit this opportunity between ARPA money and infrastructure money, and God knows what's next. This is a time to be entrepreneurial. This is a time to aggressively go after dollars much bigger than just an allocation we know we're going to get, but start competing for some of the community development block grant dollars, the HUD dollars. There's infrastructure money for doing a variety of things, including one of the things we discussed earlier today, which was multi-use stadium, and perhaps using that to increase the do work at the fairgrounds across the board. So I'm going to be supporting this motion for whatever it's worth. That's one vote, but I'm trying to explain why. And I'm really encouraging us and to direct staff to aggressively start going after whatever resources we can to shore up these programs and other programs. Other commissioners. Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you. Just the way I read my motion is that tiers 1 and 2 are spent. Items 1 and 2 are spent. The other item is not being phased, but it's not all being spent at one time. What it essentially does is list those items in item 3 as being essentially guaranteed in the double tranche in the $74 million, and then a public process will be for the items beyond that. So the 17.5 million for the adult corrections is guaranteed, but as we all have acknowledged, or many of us have acknowledged, it wouldn't all be spent at once. The legitimate concern that I hear is from Commissioner Buck, and that is that it diminishes the public process, the amount of money that is actually in a full-blown public process. But it really, for the public process, everything remaining in item in tier 4A through tier 4D would be a part of that public process to determine what sifts to the top. So so 1 and 2 are spent. The items, including the new items in 3, are just guaranteed to be spent over the course of the next period of time.
Any staff, or that includes Sheriff Harold, any words to the wise before I ask Mr. Tyndall if he wouldn't mind to restate the motion before we vote? Anyone? Yes, Mr. Kyler.
Thank you, Chair Bernie and Commissioners. I was part of the team that looked at this, and it did go through a number of iterations. I'm sure Mr. Tyndall explained that. I think one of the things that I provided input on was sort of that bigger picture of infrastructure and other dollars. There's a couple other sources of dollars that we're waiting on as well. I think you're aware that our state delegation made some 21 or 22 sub-allocations to Lane County that we will be allocating to ourselves and to some other community-based organizations. It's total just north of $13 million in ARPA funding. We've also, we are hoping, it continues to be delayed, but I think we're going to see a federal budget get to the president's desk now in February. We've got some funding poised for in that federal budget, as well as congressionally directed spending. And so really, when we started to talk about that fourth tier of projects, that's where the input that I provided to sort of suggest, look, none of this is really completely secured yet, but it's coming. And the other piece, frankly, is that the legislature, the state agencies are really taking their time and getting some of the appropriations from the 21-23 budget down to recipients. We see some funding coming as well. So I think the point being is that staff took a very hard look at this process, trying to understand the timing of it and hoping that we would get better news and clarity moving forward into that second tranche of funding.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate Mr. Kyler's comments. I know you have a motion and a second on the floor and you're having commissioner discussion, and we've had a long discussion. You still have items in front of you. So I just want to turn over to you to continue the item.
I want to point out to everyone that not only did Mr. Mokrzycki say that in front of you, but he privately texted me to take the vote. So I'm going to request Mr. Tintle to repeat the motion made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, and then we will take the vote.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. It may not be the exact wording, but it captures the intent of your motion is to approve Order 21-12-14-08 in the matter of allocating American Rescue Plan Act funding to proposed projects, which include Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 as proposed, items number from 4A moving forward, 29, 64, 70, 28, plus 443,000 from item number 60 to be included in Tier 3.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tintle. All those in favor of the motion as read, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
And forgive me, Commissioner Buck, were you an aye or a nay? Aye, okay. Let the record show that Order 21-12-14-08 in the matter of allocating American Rescue Plan funding to proposed projects, as stated in the motion, as approved, 4 votes to 1, Commissioner Bozovich was a nay. Thank you all very much, and I'm sorry this took so long, but it's a big deal. Okay. We are now under human resource, excuse me, Steve, County Administration 12C announcements.
Just a few brief items, Chair. First, I wanted to take a minute to recognize one of our employees who's done some really incredible work in the community that's been very high profile work. So, and I want to start by recognizing that in the state of Oregon, white home ownership is twice the rate of Black home ownership. We have a very tragic history of systemic racism in Oregon that goes back to our state constitution and the founding of this state that we continue to understand, acknowledge, and work to improve. And so I want to share one really great story in alignment with those efforts to improve opportunities for people in our community here in Lane County, people of color in particular. Ms. Lily Parker spent 17 years as an academic advisor for the University of Oregon, and she helped countless students of color to navigate a mostly white community here in Lane County and throughout the state of Oregon. She helped students through being homesick and mental health emergencies, homelessness, and other challenges. Her impact has had a widespread been so widespread that the university actually named the Black Cultural Center after her. So in February, I just want to provide that as context. And in February, our own Mo Young, who started in public health, was then promoted to our equity coordinator here in Lane County and county administration, and now has been promoted to be a supervisor back in public health. Back in February of this year, Mo Young discovered that Lily Parker's dream of owning her own home for the first time in her life was still unmet, and that the only thing in the way was a lack of a down payment. And so Mo enlisted the help of Emily Yates, who is a good friend and happens to be a residential services manager at Homes for Good. And between them, they mobilized their support and network in the community for a campaign to raise $25,000. That goal was then increased to $50,000 and finally to $75,000. Mo and Emily's work was really brilliant and tireless. It inspired the community to both recognize the life and work of a remarkable Black Eugenian, and to recognize the barriers that the Black community members in our community face in building generational wealth. In November of this year, Mo and Emily surpassed their goal, and Ms. Lily Parker was able to make an offer on a home. That offer was accepted. And so it's a wonderful story of all the things that we talked about in terms of community participation and mobilizing networks of folks to rise up and support someone who's given so much to young people in our community and the community at large. That story has since been carried both in local media to articles in Newsweek and Ms. Magazine, and it just continues to spiral because it's such an incredible good news story that comes right from our home community here in Lane County and from one of our own great employees in Mo Young. So I didn't want another moment to pass to publicly recognize the great work that Mo has done. I have two other quick things, but I wanted to just offer that. And I know I've spoken to many commissioners about that item, so you were interested in hearing it as well.
And if I could just add, not only did they raise the money for a down payment, but she put that down payment on a house. And in this market, that's a whole achievement all by itself too. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, it was really great work. So our thanks and congratulations to Mo and Emily and everyone who participated in that wonderful solution. The second item I wanted to just, you all hopefully have seen the announcement that we have hired a new Health and Human Services Director with Ms. Gaffney retiring and leaving county service in mid-January. We went through a competitive national search, multiple interviews, and we've hired Eve Gray as our next Health and Human Services Director. She will start on January 10th. Eve is an experienced leader who's demonstrated passion for healthcare innovation and continuous improvement. She comes to us after over a decade of work with Peace Health, Sacred Heart Medical Hospital, and the Oregon Medical Group. She has a degree, a master's of science in nursing. She is a registered nurse, as well as a certified professional in healthcare quality and certified medical practice executive. She has great experience in quality, patient safety, operational leadership. And one of the things that in addition to all those credentials and that great experience that we've been so impressed with Eve is the team building, collaboration, innovation, and intellect and hard work that she's going to bring to that really challenging role in our county's largest department with nearly 800 employees. So we're excited to welcome Eve to our organization in January, and we'll certainly have an opportunity to introduce you directly to her. And then finally, I just, with the last meeting of the year, Chair Bernie, I want to thank you and Vice Chair Farr for the incredible work you've done in the leadership on this board. It's always a lot of work. This last year has been particularly a lot of work and challenges and new things flying around. So thank you for your leadership, to all the commissioners for the great work that you've done over the past year. And especially want to thank Ms. Jones, Diana Jones, for always thinking on the fly, always managing work at the last minute, and oftentimes being at the bottom of the stream of a lot of needs. And scurrying did make sure that these items come forward and we're able to continue to get the business of the county done. So thank you to Ms. Jones, who's the critical staff support for these board meetings. That's all I have, unless you have questions, Chair.
Any questions? Comments? Well, while you're here, we are now on 13A, Order 21-12-14-09, in the matter of approving compensation adjustments for market competitiveness for non-representative classifications. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. And today we have a request to adjust compensation for non-represented positions, excluding elected officials, and consistent with the adjustments that have been made previously for our represented groups. Joining me today is Ms. Sobaczynski with the Siegel Group. She is a classification and compensation expert who's been working on a market study for the non-represented classification. So I'll just make a couple of introductory comments, and then Diana is going to go through sort of the process that she's gone through. The board previously granted a 1% cost of living adjustment for non-represented positions for 2021, and that was consistent with both the AFSCME General Unit and the AFSCME Nurses Unit. Those three groups, the non-represented employees that represent about 305 employees, the AFSCME General Unit and the AFSCME Nurses, contracts which you've just approved in this current year, agreed to a one-year rollover for a lower cost of living adjustment at 1%, given the uncertainty of COVID and the economy and everything. And so as we move forward with recommendations for this group, as we did with the AFSCME contracts, the adjustments that are being proposed and that Ms. Sobocinski will walk through are reflective of that recognition that in the current year, a lower cost of living adjustment for non-reps as for AFSCME and AFSCME nurses were provided relative to the other employee groups in the organization that received 2% cost of living adjustments in the current year. The last time the county did market compensation adjustments for non-represented classifications was in 2016. So it's been about 6 years since we've looked specifically at the market classifications. And of course, it is a priority of the board and of our organization to make sure that we have the ability to recruit and retain talent in our organization. I want to point out that the review and the analysis that's been done and continuing to be done is the same methodology utilized for represented classifications, looking at the same 5 county comparables. The adjustments reflect previous direction from the board to adjust compensation for those below market to be highly competitive in the workforce. So Diana will provide you with more information on the analysis and specific recommendations. For context, I want to just, you say non-represented employees, which to many folks may not mean a lot. Those include administrative assistants, program specialists, analysts, paralegals, investigators, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, supervisors, managers, attorneys, directors, and other unclassified employees in the organization. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Sobocinski, and then I'll have some wrap-up comments, and then we'll turn it over to you, Chair.
May I ask a stupid question first?
Please.
Ms. Sobocinski, did he say you're with the Seagull Group? Maybe I'm just hallucinating, but I could have sworn you were with Lane County. You're muted.
Yes, you are correct. I was with the county.
Okay.
And I have recently moved to the Seagull Group. It's a consulting company.
Forgive my interruption. Congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Wojciechowski. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak with you today. Lane County staff compiled data for an initial market study for non-represented positions in September 2021. Since that time, some positions have been filled and new positions created. Therefore, there are still a few positions that need a market review, but the study is nearly complete. Today, the board is being asked to approve delegated authority to the county administrator to implement market compensation adjustments for non-represented classifications that would be effective the first pay period following January 1st, 2022, consistent with methodology used for other represented employee groups. Employees in the non-represented positions would move to the closest step, not resulting in a wage decrease. As mentioned above, the analysis was completed using the same methodology for market studies used for represented employee groups. This is a review completed using the designated county comparators. Based on the analysis, over 50% of the positions and classifications are below the highly competitive range with the market. A quarter of these are significantly misaligned below the market by 20% or more. The current salary structure for non-represented positions is based on the decision band method of salary placement and can create difficulties when addressing the market increases. In addition to delegating authority, the board is being asked to approve the following compensation adjustments. All represented employees would receive a one-time payment of $1,300. the 3% cost of living adjustment in January 2022, the 2% cost of living adjustment in January 2023, and a 2% cost of living adjustment in January 2024. I appreciate your time and thank you for listening. At this time, I'm going to return the floor to Steve Mokrzycki.
Thank you, Diana. So I mentioned that this is in alignment with the county's strategic priority of our people in partnership, specifically attracting and retaining a diverse, highly skilled workforce with a deeply embedded commitment to delivering value and service to the residents of Lane County through operational effectiveness, fiscal resilience, and partnership. The total estimated additional cost for the compensation changes over the 3 years is approximately $9.3 million. We are asking the board to approve the adjustments and direct county staff to implement those changes in January. I'll be very clear that the delegation of authority related to finalizing the remaining market review and adjustments does not include the 2 positions that report directly to the Board of Commissioners. So I want to be clear about that, the county administrator and county council. And with that, Chair, I'm happy, Diana and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll turn it over to you for questions and action.
Commissioners, questions, comments? It's been a long day, I understand, but this is a big item. No questions, no comments. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
I'm prepared with the motion if you're prepared to accept one, Chair.
I am prepared to, although I hope we have some discussion to the motion, but please.
Thank you. Then I would move order 21-12-1409 in the matter of approving compensation adjustments for market competitiveness for non-representative classifications.
Is there a second?
I'll second. I was waiting for others.
Tough luck, Commissioner Buck. You seconded it. Okay. Forgive me. I've been reading a mess. I'm sorry. You're going to have to bear with me here. The motion has been made by Commissioner Farr and seconded by Commissioner Buck to approve Order 21-12-14-09 in the matter of approving compensation adjustments for market competitiveness for non-represented classifications. Is there discussion to the motion? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I want to appreciate all the folks that this non-represented classification encompasses. We have been doing a lot of contract negotiations and there's a lot of discussion, and thank yous for those folks. But I want to extend that to all our non-representative folks too. You have all been doing excellent work over the course of this last year under just as challenging circumstances as everybody else that we've been talking about this year under contract approvals. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being there to support everybody and just really appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Well, I have a question in lieu of any other commissioner. So earlier we were discussing, and I believe that the increase to the county budget over 3 years for the AFSCME contract, which is the largest, is something like $16-some million. Is that correct, Mr. Mokrzycki? And
yeah, for the general unit, yes, and an additional amount for the nurses unit.
So as we're looking at all this, and I mean, obviously we have to move forward with something. And then this, I believe, did you say this would be another 9.6 million over 3 years for this unit, for this non-represented group?
Approximately 9.3 million, yes.
So are you, as you're looking at these increases, obviously you're thinking about managing budgets moving forward. I mean, what are your thoughts? I know we have to be fair to our people and we need to put our people first. We have to make budgets. I would just like to know how you perceive this moving forward.
Yeah, this is the continual balancing act that we have as a public sector organization of balancing the limited resources and limited ability to increase our resources with the expenses that we have and the need in particular. You know, the vast majority of our expenses are people because we are a service organization, right? We don't produce goods, we provide services. And so most of our cost is wrapped up in providing those services. We're motivated as an organization, as most high-performing organizations are, to make sure that we have the ability to recruit and retain the best talent. Part of that is compensation, and a lot of it is also culture. And we're working on, but we continue to work on both of those for many years. And when I came to Lane County in 2014, we had gotten significantly behind in compensation, particularly for our non-represented groups and for some represented groups. And we spent several years really trying to build a framework and a clear and consistent methodology to make sure that we're as competitive as we can afford so that we can recruit and retain the best talent. I'll tell you, I believe we have the best talent around in this organization, top to bottom. It continues to be a challenge. So you look outside, you look at all the other competition. Commissioner Bozievich, I think, mentioned inflation, and there are pressures out there. And so that challenge continues. Our focus in the last several years has been doing everything we can do to manage our expenses effectively. So we've done a lot around health insurance. We've done a lot around debt management. And we've done a good job of stabilizing our resources, balancing our budget, having a structurally balanced budget where revenues meet our expenses, but that's an annual process. So specifically, I will say that for next year, we will be building in all of these costs that have been agreed to into our base budget and developing our budget based on any adjustments that the board has approved. And it's going to be our job, and my job as the budget officer at the end of the day, to propose a balanced budget to you that maintains services and enhances everything in as much as we can. So work ahead. And again, I would say it's a continued balancing act.
No, I really appreciate that. I think it's important to articulate that as we move forward with this. Do any other commissioners have? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate those comments so much from our administrator. And I think to his point about, culture at the organization, culturally, societally, we're going through a big shift about understanding the value of labor and essential workers and essential services. And so we're just a microcosm of those broader conversations about the value of work and of labor. And I know it's a stretch, but as Administrator mentioned, it's a stretch because we had a gap that we had to bridge as well as anything else. And so I'm really proud to be part of a board that is helping demonstrate a commitment to our workforce and that local workers spend local dollars at local businesses. So I'm happy we can do this, and I know there's going to be a lot of work ahead to make sure we bring in the resources to meet it. But I'm really pleased with where we've gotten to this year, and really appreciate the hard work of our administrator and of our bargaining team and of all of our leadership at this organization. Thank you.
Well, you're singing my song, Commissioner Trieger, about now. Here's the ironic thing as we move forward with this. The ironic thing is that Commissioner Bozievich mentioned a rate of inflation of 6.8%. If we had all night, I would argue that the rate of inflation on real assets is significantly higher than that. And yet we are coming to terms and to market with rates that are actually lower than that. So I think we're very fortunate to have great people, even though apparently we lost one. And if I'm prepared to support this motion. I don't know if there's any other commissioners that would like to speak before we call for the motion. In that case, I think it was Vice Chair that made this motion, Vice Chair Farr, and Commissioner Buck that seconded it, seconds ahead of Commissioner Trieger. to approve Order 21-12-14-09 in the matter of approving compensation adjustments for market competitiveness for non-representative classifications. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion, Order 21-12-14-09 carries unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Ms. Sobaczynski, I want you to know I spent hours remembering your name, and then I find out you leave, but it's great to see you, and continued best wishes.
Thank you for that. It's wonderful to see everyone as well.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Commissioners, we're now on item 14A, Commissioner Business. Are there any commissioners with announcements? As I lose my voice in front of you as we speak. Seeing none, are there any commissioners with future board assignment requests? Yes, Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, Chair. Real quick, while we were meeting, we received an email concerning the naming of an island in Silcoos Lake, which I've always known as Goat Island, but apparently it officially has a different name. And the state board is wishing to officially now name it Goat Island. But they need something from the board relative to whether we're for, against, or neutral, whatever. I would just like to refer this to staff to come back to us as a future item, if I can get 3 head nods.
So do you want staff to come back with a resolution to tell the state that you were right the whole time, Commissioner?
No, it's not just me. It's every local in the Dune City area, and people that travel there refer to that as Goat Island. It's kind of like a speck out in the middle of the lake.
Well, it now shall be Goat Island. Okay. Are there any other commissioners with any future board assignment requests? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. I have a question. It was this morning, or weeks ago, same thing. It feels like we had during our holiday farm fire update, there was talk about sending a thank you letter, and I think we all nodded, but do we need to make that, does our administrator need that to be an assignment to be captured here, or was what we did this morning sufficient to the partners working on the recovery efforts?
I did, sorry, I was just looking at my notes. I did capture that as an assignment, a letter to the community partner that, a thank you letter to the community partners that Matt McRae, I think, would coordinate. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. Any other commissioners? Which brings us to review of assignments, Mr. Mokrahysky.
So I heard 2 letters. I heard the one regarding the community partner, the thank you to community partners around wildfire. And then I just want to clarify Commissioner Boziewicz's request sorry, I got the Goat Island part. So that's what I was responding to. I heard resolution or letter regarding Goat Island. I'm trying to keep a straight face when I say that. Goat Island, but I think I missed if there were any more specifics around that.
I think the email is pretty specific, and Diana has the email.
Okay, good.
I do. If I can chime in, we already have it assigned and ready to go.
You're on it, Diana.
You don't need me.
No, that's true. We don't. See you later. Was that it? That was it. Well, this is the moment. It's 4:30. We are either going to have an executive session now, or within 10 or 15 minutes, or we're going to do that tomorrow morning. So what's your pleasure? Mr. Dingle, do you have any estimate as to how long this session may take?
Chair Bernie, commissioners, I really have no idea. And that is really up to you. I'm looking at it, but if when I understood the board to say we'd be reconvening an executive session at approximately 4:45, if that's what I heard you say a few moments ago.
Something like that, yeah.
I would say I'm very confident that it would be at least at least 45 minutes, just based on some of the things I've seen, and maybe longer. So it's not going to, I guess I can represent to the board. It's not going to be, I don't believe it's going to be a 15 or a 30-minute session.
Commissioners, we have multiple conflicts here. What's your preference, Commissioner Trieger?
I have a 5:30 commitment. I'm here in the PSB now and I need to get home for that. So I would have to switch to the phone for part of it and then potentially miss some.
Commissioner Bozovich, you don't want to miss this. What are you going to do about tomorrow morning?
If we can go early tomorrow morning, like 8 o'clock, I'm good there. But
that's more before.
Pat's got the thumb up for it. And if we decide to go to public session right at 9, Metro should be available.
Diana, have you checked with Metro?
I have Metro standing by on the line right now. We can probably use them at 9 tomorrow. So we'll go with that.
Commissioners, I'm going to propose, Commissioner Bose, I'm going to propose 8:30 tomorrow morning. That still should make all required time things. Would that be, yes, Commissioner Buck?
My concern is that Diana mentioned 9 a.m. for Metro. If Metro's unavailable, then I think we have to wait for Metro. Is that not right?
Just when we come out.
Metro has texted they are available at 9.
I think we only need Metro if we're going to come when we come out. So presumably, if we read into exec session now, there would not be a need to come on or be public when it first starts. And I'm confident that the board will be working on this at least until 9 o'clock. So then at that time, Metro will become available.
And I will need to create a new board meeting session for all of you because we do not have one currently planned for tomorrow.
So forgive me, I'm getting a bit rummy. I really thought I was going to celebrate my last meeting as chair tonight, but it ain't gonna happen. Are we good for 8:30 tomorrow morning? And is everything in place for that?
I'm probably going to have to stop at 9:30. I'm going to probably go somewhere where I can participate in the meeting and be available for my 9:30 appointment.
And Chair, this is me. County Council could be ready then. I'm going to defer to Diane on all the other on all of the matters.
Well, it's the will of the group. My vote is to make sure the commissioner gets his booster, but I'm going to fudge on the haircut.
I can make it at 8:30. That's fine.
Other commissioners?
If it has to be that late, sure.
Yeah, I still don't understand why 8 o'clock's not okay.
Because I have a commitment with a telemedicine thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to bring it up. I mean,
it's okay to bump my appointment. We're not bumping Commissioner Trieger's appointment.
No, wait. I should be done by 8:15, and I think that difference should make the difference. So let's just agree 8:15 executive session tomorrow morning. With any luck at all, everybody makes their appointments. Does that work?
Thank you. Now you got to read us in.
Diana, if you'd be kind enough to read us in.
Will do. Bring it up.
Because we heard
I am meeting for an executive session for Wednesday morning, December 15th. I think I heard at 8:30 a.m. And the Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660-2H ORS 192.3559A, and ORS 40.225, lawyer-client privilege, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. The board reserves the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.
And Chair Bernie, clarification for Diana, are we using the same link that we were going to use today?
We will use the same link because I threw it out there for 2 days for the executive session. Everyone will receive new links to the live meeting, including Metro.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you all for the honor you gave me this year of being your chair. Have a good evening, and we'll see you in the morning. Good night.